Today, it was snowing heavily, and at the same time, someone was calling for help. A person wakes up to that voice rising from bed. The voice says it's in a lot of pain, and the child who woke up looks towards the direction of the voice. They wonder if it's coming from the window. With an undaunted gaze, the child steps outside, heading towards the voice. Looking at their hands, a magical bubble lands on them. Then they drift away. The child runs after them. The bubbles lead to an animal that looks like a cat. Approaching it, standing face to face, admiring the animal with a smile on their face. The animal seems to be getting ready to spit something out. Ketchup then comes out of its mouth. The boy extends his hands towards the cat, which accepts being held. Then the boy carries it in his arms, saying everything will be alright and it won't hurt anymore, while a voice tells him not to cry and to sleep well for good dreams. In a room, the supposed protagonist is waking up, complaining about the cold. Someone knocks on the door, calling out for Estio. It was his brother named Terriot who was furious with him. He berates him, saying if he wants to sleep so much, he might as well pass away. On the other hand, the boy remains silent, looking at the door. Then he gets up and opens the door with a forlorn look. Terriot calls him a sleepyhead, asking if he forgot what day it is. Estio looks at his brother's clothes and responds that he'll be right there. Terriot looks at him silently, then suddenly removes his blanket, revealing his clothes, and throws the blanket at him. He tells him to at least wash his clothes because he was smelling, while calling him a curse. Estio doesn't respond, just smells his clothes to see if they were that bad, looking out the window. He says today is the coming-of-age ceremony. It's an event held on the first Sunday of the year for those who turn 19. He goes downstairs looking at a girl who immediately screams because of his appearance, saying she thought he was a ghost, asking why he smells so bad. That's his sister Rosette, complaining about the bad smell and offending him, while their father says today is his ceremony day. However, they don't care since they know the boy's ways. Rosette scolds him, saying it's shameful to be seen with him since a certain Louis will be there today. Saying goodbye, she tells him they'll go ahead and instructs him to take a bath. Then Estio wonders where he will bathe, looking at a well outside. He looks at the well silently, then pulls the rope, throwing a bucket of water on himself, soaking everything around him, shaking his hair. He shivers from the cold. Suddenly, he hears a cat meowing and recognizes the cat named Suki. Suddenly, clothes fall on his face. Suki was that cat that appeared when he was a child. The protagonist asks the cat what it is, and it replies it's a gift. Looking at the clothes, he asks where it got them. Again, it replies it's a gift. Silently putting on the clothes, he looks at Suki and asks where it got them, and it just tells him it was given to them. Suki climbs down from the well, telling Estio it was given to him, and now he's giving it as a gift to him. Looking at him, who returns the gaze, the two stare at each other. Suddenly, he sees a girl about to be hit by a cart, and Suki jumps on her, saving her life. The girl's mother asks Suki what she can offer as thanks. Suki seems curious. The girl then hands the clothes to him. At that moment, the boy realizes and sighs, saying he bets the cat insisted they give it to him. Soon he pets it, praising it for saving the girl. He quickly puts on the clothes, which feel comfortable and cozy. Estio remembers that the cat always brings things he needs, and there's no way to know the frequency or reason. It does what it wants. A bird calls out to the boy, who recognizes it as Feria. At the same time, various animals start interacting with Estio. Something catches his attention. Looking back, he calls for Tsuki, while something unknown piques his curiosity. Then a person appears. The protagonist watches her, recognizing her as Bella, but unlike him, she doesn't recognize him, asking who he is. The smelly one says it was expected that she wouldn't remember him. However, she recognizes his voice and calls him by his name. She asks if he's also going to the ceremony, and the boy says yes. Bella then offers for them to go together. Elsewhere, a party is happening. It's a bustling restaurant with many people celebrating. Two people are also drinking, asking about the protagonist. Just hearing his name, two others are disappointed. The woman next to them responds that he's a lazy one and that she sent him to take a bath, but the boy is taking too long. Then someone suggests starting without him. The others agree. An elder prepares to speak, saying that since it's too cold to wait, they should start a toast. A blonde man asks them to wait, saying Bella hasn't arrived yet. Everyone agrees to wait as they can't start without a beautiful lady, until Bella arrives with the protagonist. The blonde-haired guy thought the girl wouldn't come, but she just says she had a delay. Then the guy gets worried, asking her if she fell and got hurt somewhere. She just replies that she's fine and that she met Estio on her way. He's confused, asking who that person is. Estio introduces himself, saying it's been a long time, calling him Louis. Louis responds awkwardly, questioning if he really is Estio. The protagonist shows no reaction. Bella watches this with a smile on her face. Suddenly, she grabs the boy's arm, and everyone around is surprised as she takes his arm, inviting him to go with her, looking at the protagonist, blushing. In a flashback, a girl is left behind by her mother. A gentleman says he likes Bella, and she smiles back, saying she likes him too. Another asks if they will marry after the coming-of-age ceremony, and she replies yes. Then a wave of voices calls her name, and she yells, saying she's tired of all this. She just wanted a love like in a soap opera. Bella calls for Estio, who seems overwhelmed by Bella's thoughts. While she asks if he's okay, approaching him, touching him, then he becomes terrified. and slaps her hand away. He quickly realizes what he did and apologizes to the girl. Bella is taken aback. She apologizes for touching him without permission. He replies that it wasn't for that. This leaves the girl confused, wondering why. Estio calms down, telling himself not to have seen anything. The party continues with people congratulating the children who have become adults. The protagonist, holding a glass, calls for Bella, thanking her for some reason. She replies it's nothing, and that if it weren't for him, she would be the butt of jokes for being late, but he accompanied her willingly, while the blonde-haired guy watches the two of them, calling Estio a scoundrel and wondering where he got that outfit. Then he goes outside. Suddenly, he hears someone asking if it was the person in front of them who bought that new outfit. He replies no, and the woman asks where Estio got it, and the man says he must have borrowed it. The woman says there's no one with that kind of outfit around there. The blonde-haired one listens to the whole conversation and looks malicious. Slamming his glass on the table, he calls for the boy, saying he's never seen the design of that outfit before and asks where he got it. Estio looks at him and replies that was a gift. The guy approaches while questioning if it really was a gift, already asking who gave it to him. Estio just replies it was from a friend. The blonde insists, asking who this friend is, since they must be rich enough to give that to him. The others watch the situation. He then demands the protagonist tell the truth, asking if he stole the outfit. Estio is incredulous at that question. A memory is triggered with several people appearing in it, with the younger protagonist bloodied on the ground, while the townspeople call him cursed for hearing those things. On the ground, nearly dying, he says no. A woman appears, asking not to kill him and takes him to a place, saying he will stay in the attic from now on. The protagonist then disperses from his thoughts, and the blonde-haired guy continues saying that he stole that outfit to look nice today. The people, hearing this, agree with him, calling Estio crazy. He becomes desperate, denying everything. Bella looks at him with a look of disgust, which he notices becoming desolate. A child throws a tomato while calling him a monster, and a voice tells him to dodge. Hearing this, he lowers his head, dodging. The tomato goes towards the lamp above him, hitting it and spilling the tomato on the boy. Stunned, he realizes the situation. People start calling him a monster. Cleaning his face, he looks forward, seeing his father, mother, and brother walking away without even looking at him. He thinks he kept hope, says there's no place for him there. Then he goes home and stays in the corner. Stat, he starts laughing madly out of nowhere. And some time after his madness passes, he starts crying, saying he's going to leave while picking up a weapon, and that no matter where he goes, he just wants to stay alive. Outside, he stops, wondering where he will go now. Covering his face, he continues on his way. A carriage stops in front of him with a voice asking if he's traveling on foot in this cold. Looking at the carriage, he sees an old man asking him to get in. Seeing this, he's surprised but then accepts. Inside the moving carriage, Estio observes a bridge. Looking up, something catches his attention. An animal is on top of the carriage, which is Suki. Seeing him, the protagonist with a smile on his face is happy, thinking that he left his hometown at the coming-of-age ceremony. The moving carriage suddenly stops abruptly, and with that, the protagonist wakes up. A voice then calls him interesting, which quickly makes him get up. The knight says he managed to sleep in this cold, laughing, asking why he's so surprised, already recognizing him as a country boy, calling him cute. Estio looks at the weapons behind him, wondering if he is the carriage guard. The knight says he's making him embarrassed for being such a quiet person, telling him to respond since they had a lot of trouble for letting him into the carriage, giving him a wink, leaving him speechless. Then the protagonist reveals his name to him, who doesn't understand the name right away and confuses it with Esto instead of Estio, which embarrasses the boy. The knight introduces himself as Lena. Lena Ranikander, asking if it isn't funny. The boy is confused, responding if it was supposed to be funny. Lena is surprised by the unexpected response while calling him by the wrong name and saying he liked him, again leaving him speechless, while Lena smiles, asking why Estio is going to the city looking for a job while saying he doesn't think he'll be lucky in the city. Hearing this, Estio says he hasn't thought that far ahead, as he has no goals and even less talent to protect himself, let alone others like him. Lena asks what he's good at. Looking at him, he doesn't seem to be good at lifting weights. Estio replies that he's good at dealing with animals. Lena says if he wants to try to join a circus, he better give up because he won't make it. The protagonist replies that's not it, and that he knows what animals think. Hearing this, Lena laughs, asking if he can read minds, at the same time asking the boy to read his too. Seeing Lena laugh, the protagonist concludes that there's no one else with his ability, and that the power to read the mind and thoughts of others, even seeing them unintentionally, is something a human shouldn't have, already remembering Bella's memories. And suddenly the carriage starts to shake, Lena becomes alert and stands up. Estio just looks at him as he exits the carriage, drawing his sword. In the carriage, Lena calls for the protagonist, who immediately goes to see what it is. Lena returns and says the horses aren't moving. Complaining, he's sad that they're tired. Time passes. Estio says it's been 3 hours. The others ask why they've been in that cold for so long and suggest killing the horses and getting a new carriage. Lena doesn't know what to do, saying he wishes he could read their minds. He thinks a bit about what he said and has an idea. Shouting the protagonist's name, he grabs him by the arm, saying they're ready to go. Estio then asks where to. Lena, holding his arm, says if he really can read minds, he should read the horses. Responding he doesn't know if it will work since he's not hearing them, Lena is confident with this idea and Estio gets a little angry. But the merchant starts yelling at the horses, telling them to move or they'll die. The protagonist sighs and heads towards the carriage, asking the merchant to wait because he'll take a look at the horses. Hearing this, the merchant is a bit confused, while Estio says it will only take a second. The merchant sighs and puts away his whip, and the protagonist approaches the horses that have a strange look. He approaches and touches the horse, asking what's wrong. Then he goes into the horse's thoughts, which replies that it's scared and that there's danger ahead. Estio asks what's scary and dangerous. The same replies that there's something big and sharp that will kill all those who took care of them, and a frightening beast is then revealed to the protagonist, who immediately returns to the real world scared. Lena, desperate, asks him what he heard. Then Estio points in a direction, saying there's a large monster with white fur and sharp claws. Lena thinks that if they're attacked, they'll suffer great losses. Sharing that information with everyone, the merchant doubts the situation and asks if they really should believe in something like that, leaving the protagonist desolate. Who is about to leave when Lena grabs him on his shoulder and says he knows a large creature on a snow-covered mountain, saying its name is Kamiquia, a white-furred monkey. The merchant says it's hard to find rare species, but there might be one around here. Someone says that because it's cold, having a white monkey around isn't a surprise, and that it's enough to attract the attention of any hunter. The merchant says it's just a beast, and that's no reason for the horses to be so scared. Lena replies that it's reason enough for them to take a look since the horses won't move. He asks Estio to wait a bit, asking him to follow him since everyone is ready, saying they sent half of the hired personnel and that they're all very skilled. Looking at the protagonist, who is confused, he grabs him by the arm, saying they should go. Estio is confused, wondering why he's going along. Lena replies that you never know when you'll meet a translator, and Estio is shocked by his response, thinking that the monster is much worse than the white monkey, and that he didn't give details of his ability on purpose, so they must think he only understands the emotions of animals. The protagonist just looks at the man's back, and then Estio thinks that everyone who knows he can read minds changes their attitude towards him. He decided not to be interested in other people, even those who seem to trust him. The soldiers are heading towards the beast when someone yells for them to stop. Everyone stops and starts looking around. There's a strong wind and lightning around them. A soldier then uses a lantern spell, conjuring fireballs around them. While the protagonist is happy to see this for the first time, suddenly a strong wind blows from behind them, and a terrifying voice calls them cursed humans, warning that it will kill them all. Hearing this, the protagonist is in shock. To understand the feelings of a creature without touching it requires strong willpower. Estio freezes upon realizing they are in grave danger, and the monster continues repeating that it will kill them all. The protagonist tells Lena that they must return now. Lena asks what he's talking about since fighting is the only way. He asks if there's another monster besides that one, but Estio replies no. Lena draws his two weapons from his back, while the others prepare for battle. They wonder how it could be a monkey with white fur. The monster, hearing this, starts to scream, beating its chest, emitting a very strong shockwave. Estio struggles to stay on his feet, receiving that wave. Lena says it's not a monkey, but it does have white fur, and the girl asks if white fur is enough to consider it a monkey, while Lena moves towards the monster to attack it, which hits him with numerous blows. And stealthily, the mage conjures a fire power, launching it at the monster along with a bald man throwing an arrow at it. The protagonist is surprised by everything. However, the monster gets even more irritated and starts to scream, moving towards the bald man while Lena can only watch this happen. The monster strikes the bald man, making him fly and fall to the ground, about to be crushed by the monster. Estio runs in his direction, stopping in front of the monster, asking it to stop, while he tells it to calm down, that everything will be okay. The monster begins to calm down, staring intently at our bilingual animal hero. However, Lena couldn't wait and yells at the monster, saying he told it to be careful, attacking it suddenly from behind. The monkey screams desperately, while the others attack it non-stop. Overcome with despair, it starts to run, and the others go after it, saying they won't let it escape. Estio wonders why he did that and falls seated on the ground, questioning himself about his actions, but remembers that for a moment the monster stopped, and thinks that it could die because of this, until suddenly a wave of thoughts of something calling for its mother, saying it's scared, fills the boy's head. He recognizes that they are the thoughts of the monster and that he has to find it. He sees a cave with large steps. Observing it, he approaches it. Looking from outside, he says it's quiet and that probably the warriors didn't enter there. Entering the cave, he smells a strong scent of blood. As he gets closer, he sees the white-furred monkey with its back turned. Then he is pulled into the monkey's mind, which confronts him with a memory showing there were two other monkeys in the past. One of the monkeys finds something. It was a woman lying injured on the ground. Then he picks up the woman and takes her to his cave. The woman wakes up disoriented. The monkey, seeing that she woke up, offers her a piece of meat using a stone as a plate. Sometime later, the two of them had a child. Yes, that's right. All the monkeys were happy with that. And the woman named him Nejira for being beautiful and white as snow. But some human hunters appear, The woman then tells Nejira to hide, while she goes towards the humans who show disgust at seeing her. A shot is fired, taking the life of Nejira's mother in front of him. Then a hatred for humans swept his heart to this day. After the memory ends, the protagonist calls for Nejira, who asks if it's his mommy. Estio replies that it's not his mother, and Nejira then asks who he is. The boy just says his name. Nejira asks if Estio will also want to kill him, but this was not the boy's intention. This makes the monkey ask why he came to this place. He replies that he doesn't know, saying he just felt he needed to come there. Suddenly, Nejira becomes sad and says that humans killed his family. The monkey, not understanding, questions why humans killed his mother since she was also human. Estio says it might be because of money. Nejira says he doesn't know what money is, and the protagonist explains that it's something used by humans to get what they want. Then the monkey asks if with money he can bring his mother and family back. The protagonist replies no, that it's impossible. Nejira then asks if he can take revenge. The bilingual animal says that would be possible, but the monkey, realizing that he can only do that with money, bursts into tears. Estio just watches without saying anything. Drying his tears, Nejira says he's very nervous and really thought about killing everyone. But when the protagonist appeared, he didn't think about doing anything else. Estio says it's his own fault since he interfered with his emotions. Nejira is surprised and asks if he has such an ability, but Estio isn't sure. Suddenly, the monkey says he understands but doesn't care since he now feels much better. Hearing this, the bilingual is confused, and Nejira explains that if revenge can be achieved with money, he doesn't need it, while saying it's enough and turns to rest. Estio wishes him good dreams and soon turns to leave the cave. Outside the cave, he feels a great cold. Looking to the side, he sees Suki, who throws a bag on top of him, calling him annoying. He then descends to the ground. Estio says he's happy to see him, and Suki replies that he wouldn't be hurt by a boy so easily. The protagonist asks if he wants to be carried, but the cat replies no. Seeing Suki leaving, Estio asks where he's going. Who replies he's going to the carriage and says that as for Nejira, Estio should just leave him alone. While walking to the carriage, Estio tells Suki that he's in pain and will die if they find him. The cat asks if he intends to stay here even if he freezes to death. Hearing this, Estio is silent for a moment and says it's better to return to the cave, while Suki just agrees. The cat suddenly says he's smart, but he had no idea that the boy would abandon himself. Estio is confused, asking for explanations. Suki then replies that Estio thinks everyone will abandon him anyway, so he has no expectations. As he enters the cave, Suki says that anyway, it was annoying. The protagonist, going deeper, sees Nejira sleeping. Then he takes what's in the bag and wears it, revealing it to be that outfit that Suki gave at the beginning. He lies down in Nejira's fur and says it's cold, and that makes sense since he lives in a cold place his temperature is. Barely finishing speaking, he falls asleep. Suki then appears, saying that he definitely told them they should return to the carriage, and that they should simply abandon the monkey. Looking at the two, he stops and a light emanates from his body, and suddenly a huge shadow emerges. Transforming into his original form, the cat says that him being sick is his own fault. Then he crouches down and lies next to him, and slowly his eyes close. The protagonist wakes up and stands up. Then he sees a memory of Suki, revealing him to be the result of an experiment. The people in charge call him number 1251 and say that he doesn't obey humans because his instincts are good, but it's useless if the experiment isn't submissive, so they order him to be killed. However, he manages to escape, and after being severely injured, he starts asking for help, saying he doesn't want to die. Transforming into a black cat, lying gravely injured on the ground, someone approaches him and holds him in their arms. This was Estio saying that the cat was very cute, thus naming him Suki. The one who was considered a failure gained a name. The cat then wakes up with Estio calling his name. He says that Suki finally woke up. The bilingual thanks him because thanks to Suki he could sleep without getting a cold. Suddenly the animal questions if he is injured. Estio is confused and replies that he is not injured. Suki just transforms back into a cat when Nejira appears looking at him. Suki seems not to like this and asks the protagonist how long he will take care of Nejira. Estio replies that he should be safe now and looks at the wounds on Nejira's back, saying that the wound seems to have also healed and that it's been a while, so there shouldn't be any group hunting him. Then he begins to say goodbye to Nejira, and suddenly he speaks the protagonist's name. Seeing this, Suki was surprised. Nejira asks to go along with them. Estio asks if he wants to follow them then. Nejira suddenly caresses the boy's head, implying that he would like to go along. Estio says he doesn't mind, but it could be dangerous because he doesn't have the strength to protect him. Nejira, all cute, says he can protect him since he is strong. Besides, there is no one in this place and he doesn't want to be alone. The protagonist tells him that where he is going there are many humans and asks if when he sees them he won't get angry. Nejira thinks for a moment and has an idea, saying to Estio that he will get angry if he sees the enemy who killed his family, but that you won't get angry with the other humans, saying that it was Estio himself who taught him that. However, the boy says that someone might try to kill him, which again leaves the monkey thoughtful. Then he says that in that case he can get angry. Suki looks at the protagonist and asks what he's going to do now, but he gets no answer. In the city of Galatia, Estio and Nejira look at it. The monkey comments that they arrived before dawn. Then he looks at Estio and asks if he is tired from the long walk. The bilingual thinks that Suki has gone away again. When a voice catches his attention, there are two guards saying that it is forbidden for medium-sized animals not to wear a collar. The guard also recognizes Nejura as a beast and that he can get into trouble, but he tells him to wait, saying that he seems to be from the countryside, while taking something from the other guard's hand. Handing a collar to Estio, the guard says it's illegal to be without a collar, telling him to remember that. The protagonist is silent, looking anguished at the collar. Nejura, noticing this, calls his name and says it's okay, asking him to use it. Estio is going to question, but Nejura interrupts him with a smile on his face, saying it's okay, and that it's not as if it's going to stop him if he wants to break it. Estio is reluctant, but he puts the collar around his neck. Nejura continues with a smile on his face, while the guards say that since he came to town without knowing anything, they will treat this as a service. Going away, they tell him to take good care of it and that it seems to be a useful thing. The protagonist looks at him, apologizing for making him be treated that way. Nejura replies that Estio is like his mother. She just kept saying she was sorry to him every day, and that at first he asked her why she was sorry since he was curious, but every time he asked, she didn't answer. But after hearing it so often, he understood that the sorry his mother said meant I love you. Then the two smile in the middle of that street. Estio then goes to the streets looking for a job, but everyone refuses him, and one even says that he is not suitable because he seems very weak. And it's also because Estio is carrying a beast around, advising the boy to go to the Ignis Guild and search him a job. He asks what the guild is. The guy replies that at Ignis they will have a suitable job for him and that it is in the city center. Estio and Nejura stop walking, while looking at the guild's location, commenting that it's not hard to find. The boy holds the doorknob and opens the door. A voice greets him cheerfully. The woman says that for questions about orders, the window to the right is where to go and tells him to take a waiting ticket. Estio says he heard they are hiring. She indicates where to apply and says if he can't read then. The protagonist interrupts her, saying he learned to read. Then he goes up the stairs. From a distance, someone watches him, expressing curiosity. The person approaches Estio, already asking who he is, while thinking if he is an applicant, saying that he is a complete country bumpkin. The protagonist replies that he is there because he heard they are recruiting new members. The person asks him if he knows what the guild does. He answers yes, and that they take orders and solve them. The man, a bit angrily, says he's not wrong, and introduces himself as Hawk, the manager of the Glacier branch of the Ignis Guild. The protagonist also introduces himself to him. Hawk then calls him to sit down, while saying that normally he would decide whether to interview or not after looking at the documents. But in this case, he wouldn't mind having a little monkey to help him. Nejura and Estio don't understand. Hawk asks him his hometown. The protagonist replies it's in the river region. Hawk tries to remember the name River, and asks Estio if he means that the entire river is his hometown, asking him to specify which part of river he is talking about. The boy just replies it's in Selbia, and Hawk seems to remember it. Asking Estio what his specialty is, and if it's dealing with animals, the protagonist replies it's more or less that. Hawk doesn't like it much and says he shouldn't use phrases like that from now on, and that he needs to know properly what the boy is good, so that he can find a suitable job for him. Estio replies that he can read the hearts of animals. Hearing this, Hawk is quite surprised, and thinks that the protagonist is an ability user, but he has never heard before of a power to read the hearts of animals. There are classes with various abilities that use mana or contracts with spirits. However, according to what Estio said, his ability is strange, not fitting into any class, and it's not with people, but with animals, and that's strange. The protagonist looks at him, waiting for an answer. Hawk apologizes for not realizing that Estio was an ability user, thinking that he has potential and maybe he should invest a little in him, giving an address to the protagonist saying that there will be an animal merchant there. Hawk explains that he is a collector with rare species and needs help, while he is very quiet listening. Hawk promises a guild coin from the merchant as a reward for successful work. Handing the address paper to Estio, he says that if he succeeds, he should return to the guild. Then he takes the paper from his hand. On the street, the protagonist is heading to the location with Nejura. Looking at the paper, he seems a bit lost, but Nejura senses something, pointing in a direction, and Estio thanks him. Neju is happy with a smile on his face. Towards the location, they see a cabin. Something catches the protagonist's attention, being two dogs that start growling at him. Estio just crouches down, and Nejura looks at them with a deadly gaze. The dogs tremble with fear. Neju and Estio are somewhat confused. Then the bilingual approaches and says they shouldn't be afraid because he won't attack them. Estio explains that they are only there to find the owner of that place, and one of the dogs asks if it's true. The protagonist then starts petting the black dog, and answers yes to the dog's question. One of them starts saying it's strange because suddenly he wasn't afraid anymore, asking who he was. The boy introduces himself, saying his name, and asks if Neju is a komiquia. But someone interrupts them. Nejura and the protagonist look at him. He tells the person that he was sent by the Ignis Guild. The man says the dogs were aggressive and didn't obey, implying that he might really have this strange ability, telling the protagonist to follow him. The two enter a tent and walk towards a cage. The man asks Estio if he knows why this animal keeps turned away like this. The bald man explains that the cub is from a rare and expensive crossbreed, but now is acting strangely, calling it cursed because it doesn't eat. But the protagonist, reading the man's mind, sees him showing concern for the animal. He stares at the man but quickly turns back to look at the animal. Estio says it's just a cub. The bald man gets irritated, saying the protagonist is just stating the obvious. Estio remains calm and doesn't respond. The man is surprised that he isn't intimidated, and also because the boy said the cub is in pain, but didn't say where. Estio is about to see his mind. Suddenly, everything starts to turn red, and the protagonist screams, feeling unbearable pain in his chest. Seeing this, the man asks what's happening, but Estio replies that it's not him who's feeling it. Distressed, he looks at the cub opening its eye, and says that's the pain of this Drakey. The man, sweating, becomes confused, asking what he's talking about. The protagonist finds himself in the animal's mind, and says he's seeing a memory of the animal. The bald man yells, asking if he died standing up and why he stopped talking out of nowhere. Estio replies that this child's heart is melting. Hearing this, the man is confused. The old man questions the situation while Estio replies that this species normally lives in cold waters, and if the man leaves it in these dirty lands, it will dry out and suffocate to death. He responds, yelling, calling him an idiot and questioning what Estio is saying, since Drakeys are desert monsters. Our protagonist very calmly says that its heart is made of ice and is melting. The man calls the bilingual crazy, asking what kind of animal needs an ice heart to live, but the animal appears to be suffering greatly. The man, looking at it, has a memory of when he said winter is coming and that he will prepare a desert-like environment to put the cub in. Then he leaves the cage towards the environment and the man is surprised. The adorable animal looks at him. The bald man sighs, calling the bilingual a cursed boy. Then the man grabs a shovel and throws it to Estio, looking at him confidently while the protagonist is confused. Seeing this, the man asks if he didn't understand and tells him to get snow from outside. The man insists that the protagonist is younger, so he should do this job, and if he's late, it will be the end for the problematic Drakey, while he picks it up in his hands, throwing it into a container with water. The cub shows rapid improvement after that. Seeing this, the man with a smile on his face is happy, but soon yells, asking Estio what he's waiting for. The boy immediately leaves there, running to get snow. Outside, Estio is gathering snow. The bald man tells him to dump what he gathers into the water tank. Estio asks if more is needed, but the man orders him to keep gathering until told otherwise. Estio continues to gather the snow and put it in the water box. The ice Drakey looks at the snow fascinated, while looking at the two adorably. It's explained that Drakeys are a rare species, and yet there are some ice variants that are not well known. The adorable cub smiles at the protagonist, but the bald man puts the shovel in front of him and says not to start relaxing. Hearing this, Estio is taken aback, and the man says it's not time to rest and tells him to follow him. They go to a horse and Estio says it has a thorn in its foot, asking to separate them because they are very territorial. The old man smiles and says the protagonist's ability is very good, and gives him a bag, telling him not to lose it. The two then say goodbye. Estio seems to be bothered by something and Nejira notices it. The voices of the animals echo in his head, and the protagonist says he can hear them clearly. Nejira then asks if he's tired and Estio replies it's nothing. On the way, he thinks about what will happen, already remembering people calling him cursed. He starts to tremble and crouches down. Neju, seeing this, becomes worried, asking if he's okay and if it's because of the cold. Suki then appears, calling for Estio, asking what he's doing because he doesn't seem to be injured. Suki tells him to get up because otherwise he'll get sick from being in the cold for too long. Estio just says thank you, and Suki asks for what? The protagonist replies it's for not avoiding him. Suki asks why he would avoid him. The bilingual replies it's because the cat doesn't like to be touched. Suki says it's obvious, and that he hates being touched by people. But Estio says that right now he was touching him. However, Suki interrupts him, saying he's talking about the bilingual being different from other people. And the Satan is surprised to hear this while Suki is walking away, saying that no matter what, he will never avoid him. Nejira then calls for Estio, saying it's that house from before. From the bag that the old man gave to Estio, Hawk takes out 2 coins and is surprised that the man gave not just 1 but 2. While thinking that the protagonist really is good at what he does, Hawk calls him and cheerfully welcomes him for being a member of Ignis, and that he will give him a guild identification badge and a uniform, telling him to wear it when making an order. He turns around and says he'll get them, already handing the clothes to Estio. Hawk explains that from the 3rd floor onwards are the guild's dormitories and suggests he check it out if he has nowhere to go. Niju happily says it seems good, while the protagonist thinks that lying down that way seems nostalgic and some memories appear in his mind, saying that it's no different from before. Looking to the side, Estio asks if Nejira has already slept. The Sing replies no. The protagonist asks if he regrets it and Nejira responds what exactly. Estio says it's for having followed him, saying that he has a collar around his neck with his freedom restricted and people stare at him, and that it might be harder to move forward, while thinking that of course Neju would answer yes and considers releasing him in the mountains tomorrow. But Nenjira interrupts his thoughts, saying that he's happy to be able to follow him and that he was so relieved not to be alone. Instead of hating others, he can live while liking them. Hearing this, Estio falls silent and then thanks him. The protagonist learned to read on his own, so he didn't know the meanings of some words, but he understood one that he believes is the true meaning of bond. The next day, inside Agnes in a room, Estio is dressing in the guild's clothes. Going down the stairs, a voice calls him. Hawk says he didn't recognize him, and that the uniform suits him very well. A woman appears and asks Hawk who the protagonist is and if he's a new employee. Calling her Rosalie, he introduces Estio to her. Hawk explains that he joined the guild yesterday and will work in the support department, but it won't be magic or combat support. Rosalie is confused and questions since he is an ability user and won't be in either of those. Hawk replies that his ability is kind of special and therefore it has not yet been decided, so they will have to wait another day to get the answer. While picking up a cup, he asks Estio if he likes sweets. He doesn't know how to answer, so he does nothing. Then he takes one and Hawk says the protagonist knows how to have fun. Estio doesn't understand what Hawk meant. He comments that most people don't recognize the taste, but agrees that the ball-shaped sweet is the best, as he starts to show him how it's done and clearly the thing is sour. Rosalie asks Estio not to mind because he is always like that. He then looks at the sweet and puts it in his mouth. Hawk says he has a good feeling about this and that the bilingual will bring good luck to the guild. While chewing, he thinks that instead of being tasty, it just hurts. Swallowing the sweet, a voice asks him if that isn't incredible. It was Hawk saying that currently, they don't know to which department the protagonist will be assigned, so he asks him to help them with the work a little. Rosalie tells him to just go through the door. The bilingual enters a busy room with lots of paperwork. Rosalie asks if he saw a black rubber band because she's been looking for it for some time. Estio replies no, and she says it would be good to have one now. He replies that he understands, and the two are left in an awkward silence. Rosalie says that since he has nothing to do, she sends him to buy something. Rosalie offers the guild's stamp, instructing him to stamp the receipt instead of paying. It should be a black rubber band and a unicorn feather. Outside, Estio is quite reactionless after that, while Nenjira reminds him of the things to buy. Rosalie says they will find these things at the general store in that square, and the protagonist thanks her. Inside the store, someone is on a ladder doing something. Estio asks for permission, and the person seems to be looking for something, telling him to look for himself, and that she's a bit busy right now. The person seems to find it and reveals herself to be a girl with pink hair, while Happy-Go found what she was looking for. Upon noticing the presence of our bilingual, she is surprised, asking if he is a customer and why he is still there. She, upon seeing Meiju, panics, screaming, calling him a monster. The girl then slits from the ladder. Opening her eyes, she realizes she was saved by the protagonist and thanks him. He tells her that it's not a monster and introduces him. She is embarrassed to hear this. In the arms of our bilingual, she apologizes and says she is afraid of animals, but it just seems to be the pet of a dear customer. Estio corrects her and says it's not a pet. Automatically, the girl apologizes. Then she asks if the name of his friend was Neju. Introducing herself with a smile on her face is Selly. Our bilingual very coldly asks for a black rubber band kit and a unicorn feather. After that, Selly is embarrassed and replies that she will fetch it. While he looks at the item she was trying so hard to find, Selly then asks for a second, which makes him turn his attention back to her. Then she puts everything he asked for in a bag and hands it to him. Suddenly, she remembers the item. Selly panics, searching every corner, and Estio points in the direction where she dropped it. Selly thanks him and is happy that she managed to find the item. The protagonist is about to leave when she asks his name. He turns around and introduces himself to her. Selly approaches and asks if he doesn't mind using that item before he goes. Estio asks what it is about. She explains it's a new product that she risked a lot to get since it's a ball that can read your heart. The protagonist asks if she refers to emotions. She confirms, saying yes, it can be seen in the form of colors and questions if that isn't romantic. He then turns around and says he doesn't need it, and she doesn't believe it and asks why. The boy says he doesn't have anyone who wants to see someone else's heart, and that the ability to read other people's minds is the most useless in the world. Hearing this, she's a little surprised, saying that it even seems like he has that power, while she looks at the item in her hand. Leaving with Meiju, he arrives at the Ignis Guild and Rosalie starts guiding him in the work. The next morning, Hawk calls for the boy, saying that as he thought, now he is part of the special support department, and hands him a paper asking him to read it. On the paper is written a request from a child saying that her puppy doesn't listen to her. Estio seems a bit disappointed with that. Hawk explains that in the support department they deal with requests since it's not necessary to have combat skills or experience, because the main requesters are members of the nobility. Our bilingual talks about the detail of the requests, and Hawk replies that it seems a bit vague. It's also possible to bribe him with a gold coin, and in this way it's possible to avoid the guild member's cancellation request. The protagonist wonders if it's normal for the level of request to be so low. Hawk warns that it's difficult to please the nobles, and that if they don't like it, they can end your life. As Estio says he will remember that, Hawk tells him not to be deceived by the girl's appearance, wishing him good luck and offering that sweet, thinking that maybe his first request for a dog will work out. The protagonist reaches out to take the sweet and eats it, saying the taste is still the same. In front of the mansion, Neju and Estio are found. Then they approach the guards and say they come through a request from the Ignis Guild, and the guard asks for the request form. The guards quickly look at it and ask them to follow. Inside the mansion, a noise echoes through his mind. He thinks that compared to other dogs, this sound is different. Then Hiro appears. The dog starts questioning him about why he came there and tells him to disappear. The girl who made the request calls for the dog and runs towards him. About to touch him, Hiro starts barking. The girl becomes sad seeing her dog act that way. The protagonist just watches and says he is from Ignis to her. Looking up, the girl asks if he really is from the Ignis Guild, and Estio replies yes. In her thoughts, she thought an old and muscular man would come and wonders how a weakling like the protagonist works in the guild. Then she asks his age as she stands up. Estio replies that he turns 17 this year, and the girl seems to like hearing that. But suddenly the dog starts barking, looking scary. Neju just stares at him with that deadly gaze, and in an instant Hiro quiets down. The girl is fascinated by the monkey and talks about his size. The protagonist introduces Neju to her. The monkey looks at her adorably, which immediately charms her. She then approaches and introduces herself as Saralyn, but everyone calls her Sarah. However, the maids pull her away, saying it's very dangerous since white-furred monkeys are the beast among beasts, and tell her to only look at him from afar. Saralyn doesn't like it but just obeys. Then she looks at our bilingual, who doesn't understand, and asks her what she is doing. Saralyn says she heard he can read the hearts of animals, and she orders him to find out why her dog is so hostile immediately. Our bilingual looks at the dog and sees that he is scared because of Neju. Realizing this, Estio asks him to step back a little. Opening his eyes, Hiro sees the protagonist in front of him as he slowly approaches. The two stare at each other, and Estio stretches out his hand towards him, saying he needs to touch him, because the ability will be amplified. He then takes off his glove and tells Hiro it will be alright, and that he won't hurt him while the dog remains silent. Then he approaches and rests his head on the hand of our bilingual. After touching him, he manages to enter Hiro's mind. A dark memory is shown with a voice commanding obedience, saying it doesn't care about the mother and just orders to get rid of her. Then someone takes Hiro's mother and he becomes desperate, asking where she's going, begging her not to leave him behind while the mother is being carried away. Someone stands in front of him while saying that small size is the trend among nobles and that he needs to be small to be sold for a high price, ordering to feed him enough so that he doesn't die. The mysterious person asks if he is Viscount Fabine and asks him to wait a second, because he will wash him and bring him in an instant. In a container, they are drowning him while Hiro begs for salvation, saying that the world is a cold and scary place, and that humans took his mother and made him suffer. Suddenly, a voice calls for Saralyn, giving Hiro as a birthday present, telling her to take good care of him, and she thanks. Taking him from the basket, she spins him around, calling him cute, while calling him a precious little angel. But Hiro remembers the humans mistreating him and suddenly bites Saralyn. Her father kicks the dog, telling her to get rid of him while she begs him not to do that, because she will take good care of him. The father says that a dog that bites its owner is just a wild beast and asks her how she will raise him, and tells her to make a request to the guild, and if even that doesn't solve it, he will get rid of him himself. The protagonist is speechless after seeing all this. Saralyn then asks what he found and if Hiro doesn't like something. Estio replies everything and the girl doesn't understand. The protagonist says that Hiro is afraid of all the affection she is giving him, and that this puppy thinks that they never gave him love, because people will one day kill him like they killed his mother. Hearing this, Saralyn starts to become distressed, saying that she is the person who likes Hiro the most, and that if she had the ability to read hearts, she would have treated him better. But Estio says that just reading the heart isn't everything, explaining that Hiro's mother was killed by humans and he was forced to starve to increase his value, and the protagonist asks if she ever thought about how to calm his fears. Saralyn is incredulous that his mother is dead, and Estio explains that she was old and could no longer have puppies, so they considered her useless and killed her. Saralyn says she didn't know and starts to cry. She asks what she should do since she didn't know any of this. Estio sees in her mind that she only had good intentions for Hiro. The protagonist then begins to activate his ability. The protagonist puts Saralyn's mind inside Hiro's, and she doesn't understand at first. Hiro says it's kind of confusing but asks if she really loves him, and says that she wasn't bothering or hating him. She then replies yes and asks if she can hug him. Hiro says yes. She raises her hand and carries him in her arms for the first time. Caressing his head, the two have an incredible moment of great happiness. The two then return to the real world. Estio just watches them. The girl thanks him, saying that the Ignis Guild is incredible, and that even though she made the request, she wouldn't have known such an ability existed, and all this time she knew nothing about Hiro and that she was wrong all along. Saralyn says that the dog had been telling her everything all this time. Our bilingual replies that she wasn't wrong, and that the culprits of the story are those who sold Hiro, and the girl looks at him admiringly. Estio explains that Hiro just misunderstood her intentions because it was different from what he was used to. Hearing this, Saralyn is happy with a smile on her face. She then gives a guild coin to our bilingual, asking him to keep it safe and be careful on the way. A voice then says that he has an incredible ability. The voice was Viscount Fabien, Sarahlin's father, and she runs towards him when she sees him. The protagonist remains unresponsive as usual. The Viscount says he wasn't trying to spy on her, and that he was just coming home, but they could hear her crying from afar. He says this while one of his sons stares at Estio, and he stares back. Saralyn, embarrassed, says she didn't cry that loud. The Viscount says that unfortunately for her, her older brother Jeremian also heard. Fabien says he's talking too much since they have a visitor at the moment. Patting Saralyn, he asks the protagonist if he came from the Ignis Guild. He replies yes and introduces himself as being from the Special Support Department. For some reason, Vince Goad is not very happy hearing this, and says that from his observations, the ability Estio used was quite unusual, asking him what kind of ability it is exactly. Our bilingual replies it's the ability to read the hearts of animals. Fabien asks if it's only animals, and Estio replies yes, but the Viscount doesn't like that answer and calls him reckless, and he asks if he doesn't know what happens if he lies in front of a noble. The protagonist panics, thinking he was careless, while Fabien says he's interested in what he considers an animal, asking what the limit is, whether it's feelings or the soul, and even about hybrids like monsters and humans. Approaching, he says that if the protagonist can't answer that, his ability would be nothing more than reading hearts. Saralyn and Jeremian appear surprised by everything. The Viscount is leaving when a thought from Jeremian says that if Estio really can read minds, he is a monster, making the protagonist anguished to hear that. Fabien then says that reading the hearts of others is a fascinating ability, and that he has met various ability users and many stories, but none were as special as his. While he asks if he understood what the term special suggests, the Viscount asks Estio if he understands what he's talking about. The protagonist then panics, imagining what this man might do. The Viscount says that our bilingual has a job that only he can do in this world. He was going to respond to something when he lets go of his shoulder, and says he will send a request to the guild soon as he leaves. Our bilingual looks back, and Saralyn is coming towards him. Stopping in front of him, she's about to say something. Saralyn asks what his name is. The protagonist introduces himself again, and she says she almost sent him away without knowing his name. But anyway, she thanks him and says she will call him next time. Jeremian walks towards the two and stands in front of Saralyn, asking the protagonist if his ability has no limits. He replies that he can't read everything and tells him not to worry. Jeremian asks if he's telling the truth, because if he's saying that, it's because he's going to read everything. Pushing him, he tells him to leave. Losing his patience, he yells again for him to leave the house. Saralyn then starts crying, saying that Estio is her guest since he helped Hiru. Jeremian says the bastard is dangerous and asks her to listen to him, but she just screams that she hates him. However, the Viscount behind the door hears everything. Outside the mansion, Estio is looking at the sky while thinking about what he was called, gripping his gloves tightly. He was lost in thought. Neju watches him. Then they walk back to the guild, and on the way, the protagonist starts looking at the coin. Niju then says that humans are strange, and Estio doesn't understand what he means. The monkey explains that he is happy when our bilingual reads his heart because he knows his thoughts without having to say anything. The protagonist replies that this is probably the reason why they hate him. Niju says that's why humans are strange, and that Estio is not someone scary, but rather the most considerate of others. Niju says what's scary is not him, but the thoughts that humans hide. Our bilingual stretches out his hand towards him, and says that anyone who gets angry with him also gets scared or thinks he's a monster. But Estio says he doesn't care about any of that, and that compared to when he was locked in the attic, now he feels truly alive. A few days later, our bilingual is getting ready, already putting on his uniform. He walks to the window and looks at the view. Going down the stairs, a voice shouts at him. Hawk and Rosalie suddenly start applauding him. Then Hawk explains that the protagonist did a good job and caught the attention of the Vince Goad from before. Rosalie says that nobles like special things, and since Estio has a special ability, it was expected. However, this was faster than she expected. Already congratulating him with a big smile on her face, our bilingual remains unresponsive, knowing what that Viscount might have planned. Estio picks up the letter left by him. Opening the envelope, the information is then read. It states that the Jefferson Company, which holds most of the gem trade in the city, is closing for some reason, causing difficulties in the jewelry business. Ordering the protagonist to look for the head of the company and find out the reason. And that due to the resolution of the first request, a guild coin will be delivered. But if the second request is completed, an additional 3 coins will be added. Estio seems uncomfortable with this, but he calls Meiju, telling them to go. He smiles, saying he'll be right back. Outside, our bilingual wonders what to do when Neju calls his name and asks which way they should go. Estio replies that they just follow the main street, and that it's from the guild to the southern tip, and Meiju asks if it's far. The protagonist replies it's an hour's walk. Neju thinks of something and calls him, and asks if he should carry him. Neju says he runs very fast, and if our bilingual walks for too long, he will get tired. Estio says no and that he will be fine, but Neju is a little disappointed. In his thoughts, he says he just wanted to help but isn't good enough. The protagonist, hearing this, asks if he should accept. Automatically, Neju is happy, already crouching down for him to get on. Estio gets on and says he's in his care now, and suddenly, they start running at high speed. Neju is happy and proud, saying he's very fast. And our bilingual agrees that it was a very good run. Looking at a place, he gets off Neju. While the two see a shelf with various jewels, and Estio says it's like the shiny stone, and he doesn't understand why people go so crazy for it. Knocking on a door, he asks if anyone is home, but there is no response. Neju asks what they will do now, and the protagonist replies that the head of the company lives in that building, so he must not have gone anywhere. But he's not sure since there's a possibility he left there. Neju is confused, and Estio then sits down. Seeing that it might take a while for the door to be answered, Estio sits in front of it. Worried, Neju asks if he isn't cold and if he will continue waiting. Confirming, he says he is fine. He pats Neju's head. The sun is already set, giving way to a cold night. His face looks terrible from waiting outside for so long. He and Neju kept warming each other up. Suddenly, the door opens and the man speaks to Estio, shouting that he's crazy for waiting so long in this cold. He thought Estio would give up and go back to where he came from. Estio asks if he is Thompson, the head of the Jefferson Company. Arrogantly, he tells Estio to leave, thinking he is sent by some noble. He was about to go back inside, but stops before doing so, saying it's the first time he's seen someone like Estio. You could tell that he was suffering from hypothermia, just by looking at his face. Estio's hand was trembling involuntarily. Concerned, Thompson asks if he isn't trying to kill himself. Not wanting the front of his house to become a suicide spot, he tells Estio to go to a lake 2 blocks away, because it was warm and a better place to die. Estio says he is not trying to kill himself, making Thompson curious. He abruptly grabs Estio's hand. Neju thinks it's some dangerous action, so she runs to hold on to Estio. Thompson shouts at her for being dangerous by grabbing others suddenly like she did. Then Estio starts recalling information about Thompson. He had a beautiful wife named Teal. Having fallen in love at first sight with her when she agreed to marry him, it seemed like a dream come true. However, after their marriage, only painful things awaited Teal. Their first child died on their first anniversary, and then the second and third were a cycle of pregnancies and miscarriages. Leah was the name of their daughter. She cried energetically. With the baby in his arms, Thompson said that this child was born healthy, but Teal said she would die soon. These words silenced Thompson and left a bitter taste in his mouth. Under extreme stress and depression, Teal did not care for her daughter even after her first birthday, and soon cracks began to appear in their marriage. Kneeling on the ground in front of his wife, Thompson questions what she wants him to do. Crying, he asks if she will let their daughter die too, but he received no response. After Thompson closed his company, he gave his all to take care of his young daughter. Thompson asks why he is walking around with a creature like Neju. Then Estio speaks to Thompson and tells him that if his wife doesn't want to talk, he just has to ignore her. This phrase left him incredulous and scared. He couldn't find the words to finish his sentence. Estio advises Thompson, saying that if someone doesn't want to understand the truth, they won't listen even if you force it on them. He had discovered the reason why the Jefferson Company had closed, but at this rate, something bad could happen. Thompson grabs Estio by the collar with both hands and throws him inside the house with Neju. He locks the doors with a piece of wood, then turns and walks slowly towards him. Threatening Estio, he asks who he is and how he knows his wife. Thompson's house fell silent. Once again, he asks how he knows his wife. Estio introduces himself as a member of the Ignis Guild. Annoyed with the nobles, Thompson thinks they made a request for the guild to investigate him. But looking at Estio, he thinks he might be the worst member of their guild. Estio asks if Neju is okay. Sighing, Thompson says the nobles are blind with greed for jewels. Apologizing, he offers his hand to help Estio up. He confirms he is the head of the Jefferson Company. Estio looks at him expressionlessly and gets up from the ground on his own. Timidly, Thompson asks what request he accepted to come to his door. Estio remains quiet for a moment but decides to speak. He explains that his request was to help him reopen his doors. Crossing his arms, Thompson says the nobles are becoming increasingly impatient. He walks a bit around the house but stops, and he turns asking if his name was Estia, and asks him to wait a moment. Seeing that he got his name wrong, Estio corrects him and follows him. They went to the dining room. Thompson lights the candle on the table and asks if Estio would like a drink to apologize. He supposes that young people like Estio prefer sweet drinks like tequila with fruit or things of the same kind. Then he grabs a bottle of wine from the table and drinks from the bottle. After quenching his thirst, he speaks to Estio and says he seems to lack manners. In situations like this, he should ask for a drink to match the mood and progress with his mission, but Thompson realizes that Estio doesn't need his friendship. Hesitant, Estio says it's true. Thompson says he mentioned his wife when he least expected it, and advises him not to talk about people's personal lives like that, saying he needs context before speaking to others. Stating the mistake he made, Estio apologizes to Thompson for the way he acted. Then he asks why the guild sent him. After saying he has no intention of returning to business, Estio says, so that's it. Seeing him being so passive, Thompson feels apprehensive. He asks if Estio isn't going to ask his reason. Following what Thompson said, Estio asks why he doesn't want to return to business. Thompson sees that he isn't even interested in him. he offers him a drink again. Estio remembers the previous advice, and this time he accepts the offer. Thompson notices what Estio is doing. Suddenly, he starts to laugh and says he's a funny guy, leaving Estio a bit confused. Thompson begins to say that he loves his wife and daughter more than anything and wouldn't trade them for anything. He hands a drink to Estio. Continuing the story, he says that years ago, his wife's condition worsened and the death of their first child made her never smile again. Slowly, she stopped talking, and after giving birth to Leah, she never left the room. Once he tried to force her out of the room, but she bit her own tongue. But fortunately, she didn't die. Thompson drinks a glass before continuing and says his wife prefers to die than to meet their daughter. After telling his story, Thompson uses his hands to cover his eyes and starts to cry for his wife. Neju watches Thompson's deplorable situation with a sad face. Estio listens attentively to him crying without disturbing him and realizes that unintentionally his ability activated on its own. Thompson stops crying and says he only came to see Estio after putting his daughter to sleep and feels the story flowed. Feeling he made Estio fail his first request, he apologizes and says that at least for this year, he doesn't intend to reopen his business and tells them to look for other product companies. Thompson walks past Estio, but he decides to ask him a sensitive question. Estio asks if he will reopen his company if his wife's condition improves. This makes him hesitate and he stops walking. Estio says there is a chance he can help him. Thompson turns to look at Estio behind him. As the two look into each other's eyes, Estio says he can complete this mission. He begins to remember the job they said only he could do in this world. Clenching his hand to gather courage, Estio says he can make his wife leave her room. Disbelieving, Thompson asks if he can really make his wife leave the room and asks how he will manage to do that. Estio opens his mouth to speak, but he extends his arm towards Thompson. Neju realizes what he's going to do. Estio places 2 fingers on his forehead. Not understanding, Thompson does nothing to interrupt. Estio concentrates to use his ability, and Estio's voice speaks in Thompson's head, saying this is the ability he has. His cold eyes stare at his reaction. Not understanding what just happened, Thompson is slightly scared. He swats away Estio's hand. Again, he hears a voice asking him not to be afraid. Thompson looks at Estio and begins to understand the kind of ability he possesses. He turns his gaze to Neju. She asks him to believe that Estio is not a bad person, with a pleading look on her face. Thompson begins to feel bad about what he heard, and he falls on his back to the ground. Looking at Neju, he stammers, saying the voice in his head was hers. During the fall, he spilled the wine he was holding on the ground. Estio looks at Thompson with a thoughtful expression. He raises his hand to help him up, and asks if he will let him help his wife. Speechless, Thompson looks at Estio and Neju in silence, but he raises his hand to him, and confidently holds his hand. The two climb the stairs of the house. The upstairs hallway is silent. Stopping in front of his wife's bedroom door, Estio and Neju followed right behind him. Thompson knocks a few times on the door and tells his wife that they have a guest, but no one answers the door. He places his hand on the doorknob to open it, and they enter the room. The curtains move with the wind from the open window. Teal is sitting in a rocking chair by the window. She only had a dead fish look and a sad face. Estio recognizes it as a vacant expression. Thompson goes to the window and closes it, asking if Teal isn't cold. Turning to look at her, her weak hand was resting on the chair. Taking her hand, he feels that they are freezing. Seeing his approach, Thompson looks in his direction. Estio asks for permission to start the treatment. Thompson nods, giving his permission, raising his hand slowly to Teal's head, taking the utmost care not to hurt someone as fragile as her. Concentrating on his power, Estio closes his eyes. Feeling that her mind is excessively silent, he decides to go deeper into her head. He begins to feel apprehensive because he has never had to adjust his strength before. Estio starts to remember the past. When he was younger and looked at other richer people, he realizes it's the first time he will use his power this way. The tips of his fingers begin to emanate a spiral energy. The mind's strength begins to expand strongly. Estio feels a disturbance in the force. The interference in the physical world reaches the air and a blinding light appears. Then a dark, swirling aura spreads through the room. Thompson shields his face from the blinding light. Slowly, he opens his tearful eyes and watches a new scene unfold before his eyes. The dark mist begins to rise and the three find themselves in a forest. They look ahead, seeing what is around. A fallen bucket with spilled wheat. The axe stuck in the log and chopped firewood. Estio feels a different vibration coming from behind. Thompson notices his movement of turning around. Behind them, there is a house. A woman steps out the door to work on this hot day. The three were surprised by who they saw. Teal was leaving the house. Desperately shouting for her, Thompson was the most surprised person. He says she looks like she did in the past. Teal doesn't seem to have reacted to his voice and continues walking through them. Estio says it wasn't his intention, but they were inside her memories. Humming, Teal heads to work. She wonders if she should go to the lake with Juan and relax instead of working. Teal was the daughter of a poor farmer. Her mother died before she could remember, and her father died after she had grown a bit. The only ones left were her 2 younger sisters who needed her. Teal single-handedly supported her 2 sisters. She worked in the garden every morning. sub toys for them on their birthdays, made crafts like pearl necklaces and others. One day, while she was working in the garden, the two sisters brought branches for firewood and edible grass to eat. Teal stands up to praise her lovely little sisters. One of them gives her a white flower she found. The youngest asks her to crouch down to put the flower in her hair. These were some of Teal's best memories. Then she fell in love with a guy named Juan. He was also a farmer. Turning around cheerfully, he sees Teal walking towards him. They both talk about their days. The moments they shared together were precious. But poverty grabbed their hopes and threw them into the mud. With only 5 coins in hand, even having increased her workload, Teal was saddened that it wasn't enough to buy food and medicine for her sisters. Her sister calls her, saying she heard that Juan proposed to her. Teal responds that she has no intention of marrying yet and tells her she has already rejected him 3 times. And because of that, they decided to break up, wanting to make it clear to him that she has no intention of marrying before it's too late. And so Teal and Juan went their separate ways. In a city larger than the village in the forest, Teal runs to make a delivery, still having 5 more deliveries to finish by the end of the day. She thought about skipping lunch to finish before the end of the day. Maybe then she could support her family until the end of the month. Suddenly a man falls, dropping boxes on the ground. Seeing this, Teal decided that helping him was more important, running to check his condition. That man was Thompson, and he was very sick. Seeing these memories, he remembers that this is the first time he saw Teal. She saved him that day, and took care of him until he woke up. Slowly opening his eyes as he woke up, he is startled by the person in front of him. In his eyes, she was the most beautiful and kind woman he had ever met. A time jump shows them the moment when Thompson proposed to her. He had bought a very expensive ruby ring. One day, Juan ran to her in the forest. He said he heard about her marriage. Seeing the ring on her hand, his world collapsed. He shouts that he can't bear it if she abandons him. Taking a vial from his pocket, Teal is frightened by the idea of him doing this because of her. Continuing the threat, he says he can't imagine living a life without her, and keeps begging Teal to come back with him. Her expression of fear is horrendous. She tells him to do what he wants because she won't go back with him. Turning to leave, she says she has no more connection with him. Confused to see his threat not working, he tries to go after her, but Teal pays him no more attention. She says she hopes he finds a good girl and is happy with her. Unwilling to accept the rejection, he takes the poison. Hearing the sound of swallowing, Teal is startled. She quickly turns to see Juan. He had fainted after drinking the poison. Thompson and Estio saw the scene of Juan drinking the poison. He had no idea that another man loved his wife. Estio says she didn't want him to know because she felt cursed by Juan. Thompson clenches his hand tightly, and in the end he realizes that the reason his wife married him was for money. Estio says that it might be true because she rejected the poor farmer and chose the man who gave her an expensive jewel. He asks if his decision would change if she really chose him for that reason. Confused, Thompson looks at him sideways. Estio asks if her decisions were influenced by money and poverty. Would he exclude his wife from the 2 most precious people in his world? Answering no, he also adds that his wife is the most precious to him. He asks what has changed then. Thompson says nothing has changed. Teal is still his precious wife, but thinking about the fact that she is still trapped in this memory, it irritates him that she gave up the chance to have had a happy life. Tearing up, Thompson thinks that Teal won't feel anything even if their daughter dies. And the memory of his daughter's birth is the next to follow, from Thompson asking her to hold her in her arms at least once. Estio says it's not that she won't feel anything, but that she is already suffering. Thompson, confused, asks what he means. Returning to the real world, he explains that his wife thinks that losing her children in the same way every time is a way to atone for her own sins. Thompson is in disbelief hearing this logic, but he remains silent, seeing that it was his wife's choice. Slowly approaching his wife, he kneels and says it's not her fault. Holding her hand, he says that their daughter will live well in the future, that she won't die, and will be waiting for her. And Thompson asks her to stop blaming herself and come back to them. She has no reason to hurt herself, and he wishes to bear the same wounds as she does. Still with her vacant face, Thompson doesn't stop talking to Teal. He repeats the same phrase, saying that if anything happens, they can both be hurt together. Suddenly, the window glass shatters. Thompson immediately protects Teal from the glass shards. He sees that his wife has finally returned with her original expression. His face fills with joy. But Leia's loud crying interrupts this moment. Teal gets up to go see her daughter, rushing to her room, going downstairs to see her. Taking her daughter from her crib, Teal apologizes to her daughter for not being close to her when she was born. Thompson places his hand on her shoulder. From the sound of her daughter crying, he recognizes that she is hungry and hands her a bottle. Feeding their daughter, he asks if Teal is also hungry. Finally, they had become a true family. Estio leaned against the wall in the hallway, but his arm lacked strength, and he fell to the floor, startling everyone. In this quiet city, there weren't many people who could help. Thompson ran through the city to the doctor. Half asleep, the doctor walked to answer the door. Upon opening the door, he was surprised. Thompson was carrying Estio in his arms, accompanied by Teal and Meiju. Estio was placed in a hospital bed. A lamp was placed in front of him. The doctor opened his eye to see his reaction. After examining him thoroughly, the doctor thought for a moment. He asked if Estio was an ability user. Thompson replied that he was, and that he ended up like this after using his ability to help his wife. Given this, the doctor said it was a problem with his ability and beyond his expertise. Estio's fever rose higher. With the doctor unable to treat him, Thompson asked where they should go. The doctor responded that there weren't many medical facilities in Galatia that could treat him. His diagnosis was that using the ability had made him like this. In most cases, resting enough is sufficient. They would observe until tomorrow, but depending on the situation, they might need to ask for help from the affiliated guild. Thompson sighed in relief and Teal touched his shoulder. Turning his head out of curiosity, he saw Neju beside the bed, worriedly looking at Estio. The two exchanged glances and thought for a moment. Coughing, he cleared his throat before speaking. Neju held Estio's hand on the bed. They remembered how Neju had appeared in their daughter's room saying that Estio was hurt. The two were shocked to see that she knew how to speak the human language. Concerned, he looked at her. Crying with worry, Neju continued to stay by his side. Thompson said that since Leo was at home, the two of them would go back first and would cover his costs so they could contact him if they needed anything. Hearing this, Neju calmed down. She asked about the guild's request that Estio had to complete. Looking at his wife, Thompson thought. Teal looked back with a smile on her face. He said that for his benefactor, he would reopen his business to cover his mission. Thanking him, Major nodded. Thompson and Teal left to return home. In the hospital, there were wheelchairs. On a table, there were already medical devices. Neju spoke to the sleeping Estio, saying that he had managed to fulfill the request. The human he helped had returned to normal as well. She sat on the floor near the bed. Resting her head on her knees, she made a wish that he would wake up and return home together with Neju. The sun rose, giving rise to another day. The light passing through the window woke him up. Slowly, Estio opened his eyes. He seemed recovered from his previous weakness. He sat up in bed, still groggy from recently waking up. He looked to the side to see Neju. With tearful eyes, she was very happy to see him waking up. She suddenly jumped into Estio's arms, knocking him back onto the bed. As soon as his condition improved, the two left the doctor's infirmary. He asked if he didn't want to stay another day to stabilize better. He said it was enough since he had already been lying down for more than 2 days. They returned home, leaving footprints in the snow. They arrived back at the Ignis Guild. Reporting the success of the mission, they were paid. The senior said he had already produced many talents with his hands, but this was the first time someone returned with a good result in such a short period. Estio asked if he was serious, and he said yes. Also informing Estio, he said that now he had a much higher reputation not only in this city, but also among the nobles of neighboring cities, and even said there were rumors. Estio, curious, asked what rumors they were. The rumors said that an ability user appeared with a unique type of ability. Estio appeared in front of a mansion. Viscount Fabien was the one he was going to meet. He reviewed the details of the mission request. The requester was Viscount Fabien, the details were secret, and the reward was to be discussed in the future. Upon arriving at the mansion's doors, the guards let him in. Entering the mansion, he was warmly received. A little dog named Hiru came running to his feet. Recognizing the little animal, Estio was very happy. Hiru greeted him as it had been a long time since they last met. Then a little girl's voice called for Hiru. Puffing out her cheeks, she asked if he liked Estio more than her. Hiru only barked in response. Disheartened, she said she still couldn't win against Estio. Then she asked why he was there. Seeing an envelope in his hand, she realized that her father had called him there. She said it was great to see him again, and agreeing, Estio only said yes, making her ask what he thought. Confused, Estio said it was not bad, but this response made her curious. If not bad meant good or bad as she pinched his cheeks. Curiously, Estio asks if she isn't worried that he might read someone else's heart. Without thinking, she says she isn't worried. He adds that he could discover secrets she doesn't want to reveal to others if she's not careful. Thoughtfully, she says that could be embarrassing. He says that maybe he could even control her emotions. But instead of being scared, she seems impressed. Estio questions if she isn't frightened. She looks thoughtfully at his face. Then she asks why she would be scared as she knows Estio wouldn't do that. Her response surprises him, leaving him speechless. Then the butler arrives, apologizing to the young lady, saying her master is waiting. The young lady looks displeased and the butler tries to calm her down. She then bids farewell and tells Estio that he cannot leave without seeing her before he goes. Raising her pinky finger, she asks him to promise. Being led to the Viscount's room, the butler knocks on the door, signaling his arrival. Permission is given to enter and Estio appears. While he is presenting to make the request, the Viscount interrupts him, asking if he understands cacti. He was looking directly at one while asking this question. It was a small cactus in a pot in the middle of the table. Replying, Estio says he does not. Then the Viscount starts to explain that he finds it fascinating how a green plant grows in the desert where it's hard to find water. Since they are plants, it's not like they don't need to drink water to live, but if you give them the same amount as a normal plant, they can rot. Depending on who cultivates it, its size and condition can vary greatly. It is a much more unstable plant than you think. He concludes by saying that an owner who doesn't know its value can easily kill it. Remaining silent, Estio listens attentively to the Viscount. Then he turns back to look at Estio. He asks him if he can read the interior of plants like he does with humans and animals. Taking the cactus in his hand and showing it, Estio observes intently towards the cactus. The Viscount approaches with the cactus in his hand. Using his powers to read the cactus' mind, suddenly a voice shouts that it is hearing too much noise. Estio's body becomes very rigid upon hearing this voice. Upon reaching his side, he says it's hard to say that plants also have desires. The Viscount says this phrase while looking at the cactus in his hand. He just didn't expect the cactus to actually have thoughts and kept saying that the Viscount talked too much. Feeling very uncomfortable, Estio just looks at the cactus in silence. The Viscount says he has no choice, but that he has the right to choose who he will serve as his master. Then he asks Estio to become his subordinate. He is not just offering him a job, the Viscount will also make him a member of the Fabian family. Curious, he asks if he will become a soldier under his command. The Viscount says he has no intention of using him as a mere soldier. With a smile, he opens his mouth to speak. He intends to appoint him as an advisor, gaining a position where no one in this house can disrespect him, and the only person he would have to answer to would be Viscount Lemel de Fabian himself. Estio asks what he would have to do. The Viscount replies that it is something only he can do. He places his hand on Estio's shoulder and says that he only has to read the mind of the person of his choice. The cactus responds that these are the words of a manipulator and that it is surely a trap. Thanking him for the offer, Estio says he is already satisfied as a member of his current guild. The Viscount says there has been a misunderstanding. This was not an offer, but an order. Estio asks what he will do if he does not obey. Calmly, Lemel says that nothing immediate will happen, but that eventually he will get him. Sarcastically, the cactus says that he could be a prophet with a confidence in those words. Bowing, Estio says that if he wants him to change organizations, he will have to discuss it with the guild. Seeing that he will not come on his own, the Viscount starts to think since he is not someone who would be easily influenced. Then he decides to give him a little more time to choose. He hands his cactus to the butler, saying he will put a prettier flower in its place. Desperate, the cactus orders him to let it go, but has no control over it. The butler then asks Estio to follow him to the exit. As they walk down the hallway, lamenting, the cactus said it had never pricked anyone before. Estio then asks the butler about the cactus, and asks that if they are going to throw it away, he would like to keep it. The butler said that it was a difficult species to care for, with many thorns and no flowers. He asks if it's still not confirmed that the cactus doesn't flower. Due to his insistence, the butler hands him the cactus. The two arrive at a door, and he asks Estio to wait while he calls Miss Saralyn. The cactus kept saying it would die of cold before being burned to death, and even wondered if freezing to death was less painful. Estio tells it that he will not kill it. The cactus thanks him. After hearing the human speak, it needed a moment to process. Then Estio spoke to the cactus once more. He wouldn't burn it or freeze it, but since it was his first time seeing one, he didn't know what the ideal environment was, and he asked it to let him know directly when it's thirsty. Since it can hear his voice, Estio asks a favor, to let him know if it finds anything uncomfortable. Hearing Estio's kind words, the cactus calls him God, but he corrects it, saying his name is Estio. The cactus says its name was Ahurakakuruhu Hurakaku. Plants usually have names that long. Estio gives it the nickname Ahuru. Neju is impressed that Estio can even talk to plants. He hears Neju's praise and is pleased with her smile. Then he introduces her to Ahuru. Neju says it's cute. Ahuru thanks her for calling it cute and greets her as well. With his hand on Ahuru's head, Estio says it's not as prickly as he expected. It says it's being nice because it's Estio. Normally, it hurts if pricked properly. Estio asks if that's really possible. Ahuru says yes, but it still can't fully move its body. Curious about its words, Estio asks what it means by still. Ahuru says that if plants live long enough or if their will is strong enough, they can move as they wish. It is still young, but its will is strong, so it can control whether its thorns prick or not. While they were talking, someone arrives, asking if he didn't tell him not to return. Estio turns his head to see who it is. The Viscount's other son is staring at him. He approaches Estio, asking if his memory is bad, or if he took his words as a joke. Estio was about to say that the Viscount had called him, but he interrupts, asking if he can also teach animals to speak besides reading hearts, and calls him a monster in front of Neju. Estio doesn't seem to like the way he is speaking to them. Then he continues, saying that besides raising talking beasts, he wonders if Estio is also trying to teach plants to speak. His gaze turns to Neju, analyzing her white body and red eyes, saying that an animal that learned to speak could be very valuable. He asks how much Neju costs. Estio remains silent, not responding. Even without a response, the young man continues his provocation, saying he will buy her from him, thinking that with such a big body, it would be difficult for him to feed her. Hearing what the young man says, Ahuru becomes very upset, and asks if he is stupid. Estio says that Neju is not for sale. The young man said the negotiation was over since he could read his mind. Then he hands over the 10 gold coins he had with him. Again, he says that Neju is not for sale, but the young man interrupts, saying it's not good to be too greedy. He asks how much he really wants for her. Expressionless, Estio rejects his offer, saying he won't sell her. This attitude irritates the young man. He shouts, asking how a commoner can refuse a noble's offer, and that he has been holding back from hitting him after ignoring his warning not to return. Neju is uncomfortable with the shouting. Estio says he only came to the mansion at the Viscount's call. The young man retorts, saying he's quick to talk nonsense. Lifting him by the collar, the young man shouts at Estio, asking if he wouldn't of his evil heart. This action irritated Neju so much that she shouted for him not to insult him. Startled by her shouting, the young man releases Estio. He falls to the ground off balance. Neju asks if he is okay. Estio lifts himself, saying he is fine. A small smile appears on the young man's face. He says that for the monkey's loyalty, he will offer 30 gold coins. The young man calls the 3 nearby guards and orders them to take Neju to the breeding field immediately. Estio shouts, saying for the last time that he will not sell Neju. The young man becomes completely furious and shouts, saying he has gone mad for raising his voice in front of a noble. Estio remains silent because he could only stay silent in this situation. He was surrounded by 4 mansion guards, thinking about what to do now that it had come to this point. One of the guards orders him to hand over Neju, but his arm is injured in an instant. He hardly had time to react as it was so fast he couldn't see. His screams are heard throughout the house. It was Neju who attacked him. Her hand was red, and the carpet was stained. The others were frightened to see this. The young man clenches his hand in anger, saying he had the audacity to hurt a servant in the Fabian house. More guards arrive to try to help. Pointing at Estio, he says that he tried to kill him and to arrest him immediately. Immediately, a trap is activated. A net is thrown over Neju, capturing her. Next, an electric current is activated, paralyzing her. She says that they were the ones who called her a monster before and asks how they can act more like monsters than real monsters. The guards raise their swords to attack her. She roars furiously to intimidate them. The young man is frightened by the roar. Then the Viscount arrives at the scene and asks his son Jeremian what he was doing. Irritated, he looks at his son and says that he caused something that would naturally be under his control if he hadn't interfered. His son tries to explain, but he tells him to shut up. Then he tries to calm himself by taking a deep breath. He orders the knights to capture Estio alive, but says he doesn't care what happens to Neju. The knights position themselves to obey his command. They activate fire magic with their hands. Neju is frightened and warns Estio about the magic. The Viscount and his son look at them expressionlessly. Estio tries to remove the net from Neju. She apologizes to Estio because she just wanted to stay by his side. Then he tells her that she doesn't need to apologize. Neju says that this seems to be her end, and then she lowers her head, accepting her fate. All the guards had finished preparing their attack magic and released it. The fire magic caused a great explosion in the hall. The Viscount and Jeremian shield their eyes from the smoke. And in Jeremian's mind, he thinks that nothing would have happened if Estio had accepted the money. Then a shadow appears in the smoke. Estio says that the one who needs to apologize is not Neju, but rather the Viscount and his family. Both are surprised to see him survive the explosive magic. He orders them to get rid of Estio. The guard behind him prepares. He tries to use his magic again. This time his body is strengthened, increasing the size of his muscles. With his power in his body, he attacks Estio from behind. However, our protagonist's eyes shine. He makes eye contact with the attacking guard. An inexplicable source of fear begins to arise in him. He slowly backs away from Estio and points his sword at his own heart. Viscount Lemel asks what his soldier is doing, but is too late, and he goes for the kill. Strawberry juice splashes on Estio's face. He turns to look at the others. The soldiers beside him start to feel fear. This time, he doesn't use his power to attack. The soldiers feel an emptiness inside them and immediately drop their weapons, falling at Estio's feet. Everyone around him fainted on the ground. Estio's face hardens as he looks at the floor. Terrified, Jeremian falls to the ground. He looks at the Viscount and Jeremian. Then Lady Cerilyn arrives, descending the stairs and sees the entire scene. Indifferent, Estio stands among the bodies of the soldiers. She raises her hand to cover her face, but the shock was so strong that she faints on the stairs. Lemel immediately runs to save her from the fall. Holding his daughter in his arms, he tries to make Estio feel guilty, asking if he is satisfied. Then he asks if he wants more blood to be shed. Estio wonders why he should hold back, even with the suffering in his childhood, and up to this moment when Neju was mistreated. The reason to hold back never existed. He clenches his hand. Even now, if he wanted to, he could kill them. Then he tells the Viscount that he will stop, saying that it is good that he is a friend who understands, and in return, asks him to pretend that nothing happened here. Frightened, the Viscount looks at him doubtfully. Jeremian calls Estio a murderer and complains that after everything he did, he still wants them to pretend that nothing happened. Turning to look at Jeremian, Estio tells him that he is not asking, but that he is ordering them to forget. With terror in his eyes, Jeremian goes into shock. Then he also faints to the ground. All the members of the Fabian family are unconscious at this moment. Someone calls Estio from behind. It was a black cat named Suki. The cat starts to transform and grows in size as well, becoming a magnificent black tiger. He asks why Estio is standing still since he cannot carry Neju alone. Immediately, Estio removes the net from her and places Neju on Suki's back. He also tells Estio to get on his back, but Estio says that Suki will only get more tired and prefers to walk. Suki says that carrying him along is not a problem, so Estio says he will be in his care. Then they start running out of the mansion, running in the middle of the night out of the Fabian territory. Estio catches Tsuki's attention along the way. He responds by asking what it is. With this sad look, he says that it seems he really is a monster. Besides reading people's hearts, he can also control them and even make people die. But despite this, he didn't feel any remorse in his heart. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but he didn't feel fear or sadness. Tsuki asks, so what if he didn't feel anything? And says that if it were him, he would have killed them all. He says there is no reason to feel fear or sadness for those who hurt someone important to him and even calls him soft. Estio says that in the end, the one who was hurting others was him. Tsuki says he might have felt a little sad because he didn't want to hurt anyone. Haru asks to say something too, saying that there is no way someone can be a monster if he cares so much about being a normal person or not, and even if he's not, so what? There is nothing wrong with being a monster if he likes a talking monkey and a cat that transforms into a tiger. Then Haru realizes he said more than one thing and apologizes for talking too much. At the Agnes Guild, the manager is shouting. A person with bird wings apologizes, saying that it was an order from the superiors, and he curses the messenger, calling him a pigeon. The messenger corrects him, saying he is an avian and not a pigeon, as an avian is a birdman species. The secretary arrives to calm the manager down. Then she takes a look at the letter he received. It's a summons order from the guild requesting Estio's presence. She wonders if the royal family pressured them or if someone from HQ thinks Estio is a dangerous ability user. But he had been missing for almost 10 days and there were still rumors about Viscount Fabien. The manager says that Estio is not someone who would hurt another person. The secretary speaks to the manager and he calms down to listen to her. She says that Estio had returned. He apologizes for taking so long to come back. His clothes were dirty and wrinkled. The manager tries to gather words to say something, but looking at Estio's face, he realizes something may have happened. Then he raises his arm towards him and puts his hand on his shoulder, saying he did a good job. Estio asks if he won't question him about the details of what he did. Obviously, the manager says that he will have to submit a mission report. He has no idea how worried they were when they couldn't contact him anymore. The messenger clears his throat with a cough. Then the manager says it is a relief he returned since this job was a bit complicated, and they have had many cases where they lost valuable people in vain. Curious, the manager asks where Estio's partner had gone. He asks which partner he is referring to, and the manager says Niju. Estio says she got a bit hurt, so she is resting. She is almost fully healed, but they are taking it slow. Relieved, the manager is happy that he wasn't hurt much. He tells Estio to go back and says he can submit the report in up to 3 days, but the messenger calls their attention again and says it will be a complicated situation. The manager asks what is so complicated. He just asked a guild member to rest after completing a request. The messenger opens his wings inside the room. Estio confuses him with an angel upon seeing his pair of wings. The messenger then announces that Estio must go with him to headquarters. Still admiring those wings, Estio is left speechless. Then the messenger says they have to go right now. Without wasting any time, they get into a carriage. Estio is being taken to the headquarters. On the way, he remembers the conversation he had with manager Galatian. He responds that he cannot refuse the decisions of the headquarters while he is still part of the organization. Sighing, the manager says that this is true. Estio feels very grateful and also feels sorry for the manager, but he is happy to have found another place to go. While he is resting, Ahuru says he has understood something. Estio opens his eyes and looks at him. Clarifying, Ahuru says that he understands what is wrong with Estio. He doesn't know how to say no and is always obedient to the will of others. Ahuru advises him to always say no when he doesn't want or hates something. The messenger asks what's wrong with Estio. Since he can't hear Ahuru, he certainly has reason to be concerned. And while ignoring the Ahuru, our protagonist responds that it's nothing. Even after thinking so much without sleeping, Estio ignores his advice, making him irritated. Estio speaks curtly, telling Ahuru to be quiet. After seeing him talking to a plant, the messenger becomes curious. He asks if Estio can talk to plants, and he says yes. Impressed, the messenger asks Estio to demonstrate his powers by reading his mind. But our protagonist finds the messenger irritating. While resting, Neju adjusts herself on the carriage's sofa. She grunted a little while she slept. Estio looks at the messenger and starts reading his mind. Having been startled by Neju, the birdman withdraws. He looks at Neju, feeling both admiration and fear of being devoured, while Estio reads his thoughts and speaks aloud. Amazed by our protagonist, the birdman thinks he should have asked before. Having his feelings of embarrassment revealed, the messenger screams and apologizes to him. Estio asks if he is still curious, and the messenger says no and that he can stop. Neju had woken up from the birdman's scream. Noticing this, Estio tells Neju she can still sleep more because they have a long way to go. She then asks our protagonist if he has already slept. Estio replies that he slept a little. Seeing his tired face, Neju tells him to sleep with her as his pillow. When he refuses, Neju grabs him, and she puts him on her shoulder. Estio thanks Neju for her comfortable shoulder. Seeing that the messenger was curious, he asks him what he wants to say. Without hesitation, he says that the three of them seem like a family. They were suffering from rain on the way. Because it was night, he asks if Estio is not cold and says he can raise the temperature if he prefers. Even with all the messenger's generosity and offering another blanket or something to eat, Estio says he is already very comfortable. He starts comparing it to the attic he used to live in and thinks that this carriage is much more comfortable. Suddenly, he misses the sweets in the manager's office. The rain continues to fall without stopping. The carriage protected them from all the rain. Estio watches the raindrops dripping on the glass. Ahuru realizes that this is the perfect weather for telling ghost stories. Still awake, Estio sees Ahuru wanting to tell stories. He pokes one of his spines while thinking that humans are scarier than ghosts. Suddenly, the messenger moves during his sleep and starts snoring very loudly. Perplexed, Estio cannot believe what he is seeing. Then Neju's ears hear something. She wakes up immediately after hearing the noise. Noticing Neju wake up, Estio tells her that if she woke up from the snoring, she can go back to sleep. Neju says she heard something approaching the carriage, but it wasn't human or animal, and she had a strong bad feeling. She immediately opens the carriage door and warns that a horde of monsters has appeared, and they are completely surrounded. As he wakes up, the messenger asks how many enemies there are. The soldier says they are harpies with high combatability. Harpies are monsters that should not appear in winter, which surprises the messenger when hearing about the monsters. The soldier says he doesn't know why the harpies have awakened, but they cannot escape because the horses are not fast enough. Neju says she will help fight these monsters. Estio was going to tell her to wait, but she quickly leaves the carriage before that. She tells Estio to stay and wait in the carriage, but he doesn't know what to say being left behind like that. The rain seems to have stopped, but the sky is still cloudy. Apprehensive, the guard is still nervous even with Estio's partner going to fight the harpies alone. The Birdman says he is just a mailman and has no combatability. Estio gets up from the carriage and says he will help. The mailman says that Estio is not the fighting type either. He agrees but says he has no intention of fighting the harpies. Estio's cold gaze makes his body tremble. Noticing that Estio's gaze is different from before, he becomes a bit worried. If Estio had no intention of fighting, he thinks that Estio wanted to become harpy food along with his friend. After realizing his intentions, he goes after Estio to inform him. Harpies are wild beasts that move in groups. Unlike avians like him, harpies are not enemies that can be defeated with brute force alone. He asks Estio to listen to this and not get himself killed after dealing with a few harpies. Meanwhile, Neju is fighting the harpies alone. He suggests they flee while they are not being massacred, but something from above alerts him. He sees a harpy flying above them. She looks down and sees her prey, heading directly for the avian. Frightened, he can't think of dodging. He prepares for the collision with the harpy, but not feeling the pain of the blow, he opens his eyes to see. Estio had jumped in front of him, blocking the monster's attack. The harpy was attacking Estio's shoulder. It seemed like she was biting his shoulder instead of pecking. Worried about him, the messenger screams in horror. The blood from Estio's wound was dripping. The fragrance entered the harpy's nostrils. Even the other harpies that were not fighting looked more closely. Then all the monsters gathered. The harpy attacks him fiercely again. Neju punches the same one that was attacking Estio with all her strength. Her attack easily disoriented it, sending it flying with Neju's strength. Worried, she asks if Estio is okay. Even while bleeding, he responds that he is. She asks about the blood he is losing. Compared to his life, he says is nothing. The messenger thanks him for saving his life. The other harpies begin to attack. Neju warns that more of them are coming. Thoughtfully, Estio wonders if he can handle this against several monsters. Then he activates his power. His blue eyes shine and he orders the harpies to stop moving. The activation of his power even affected the trees. The harpies stop moving in the air, and he questions whether he should kill them, but he decides to send them away. They all start flying back to their nest. The messenger wonders how he did that. It was the first time he saw a monster obey a human's orders. Estio tells them to return to the carriage. Neju says he is as kind as ever. Though a bit apprehensive, the messenger decides to go too. They ignore leaving behind an unconscious harpy. After that, the night became quiet again. The messenger still questioned how the group of harpies had left so quickly. Seeing Estio's feats, he wondered why the headquarters was looking for him. Getting into the carriage, he asks Neju to be careful. Estio asks if she was hurt in the fight. While looking at Estio, the messenger thought he was a dangerous being. It was still night, but the sky was clearer. The carriage could be seen under the moonlight. Suki says that Estio is annoying. He woke up in the middle of his sleep and sees Suki in his cat form on top of him. He tells Estio to go back to sleep and not wander around getting bitten by monsters again. He apologizes for being careless. Suki tells Estio not to apologize and to stay out of trouble, so he doesn't feel the need to apologize to him. While dozing off, Estio looks at Suki on his lap. With his back turned, Suki asks him not to hurt anyone. The next day, the carriage was moving again. Ahuru was happy with another beautiful morning. He wakes up Estio, who was lying on the sofa. Then it is noticed that roots had grown under Ahuru's pot. Standing up, Estio asks if he knows how to walk now. Jokingly, Ahuru asks if he is shocked to see a cactus walking out of nowhere right after waking up. He says he was also surprised. Then a shadow covers him. It was Neju, who was excited to see Ahuru walking. She congratulates the two and they greet each other. Still quite sleepy, a messenger wakes up. He sees Ahuru and Neju playing together and says that Estio's friends are quite peculiar. Even seeing a cactus walking doesn't surprise him as much. After all, scaring off a flock of harpies is more impressive to him. Then he remembers the events of the previous night. Staring at Estio, he imagines that it wouldn't be so surprising if he had a dragon as his ally. The messenger stretches as he gets up. Seeing the messenger's wings, Estio says they are cool. This comment embarrasses him but also makes him a little happy. They continued on their way on the dirt road. They were having breakfast when Estio thought of Ahuru. He was walking around the carriage, enjoying being able to move. Estio asks if he needs water to feed himself, but he replies that he doesn't because he's already full. Curious, Estio asks if he has already eaten. Then Ahuru starts explaining, asking our protagonist about the injury from the previous night. Estio listens attentively to what he will say. Ahuru asks if he wasn't bleeding a lot since the wound on his shoulder was very large. Remembering, he says he was indeed bleeding a lot. The blood was running down Estio's body until it splashed on Ahuru. Then he says he drank some of the blood he shed. The atmosphere becomes a bit too quiet when Estio hears this. He lifts Ahuru from the ground and asks to confirm if he really drank his blood. Ahuru says yes. Neju and the messenger only hear Estio talking to himself since they can't hear Ahuru. Agitated, Ahuru asks Estio not to get things confused as he didn't drink his blood on purpose. Besides being able to move more freely, a flower also grew on his head. Expressionless, Estio looks at him and asks if the flower grew after he drank his blood. In his mind, the messenger says that Estio should be more worried about the fact that a normal plant drank his blood and learned to walk because of it. Then Ahuru gives the flower that grew to Estio as a gift. Happily, he thanks him for the flower he received. Ahuru says that he should be the one thanking him. Suddenly, the flower begins to glow with a golden light. Then the flower disintegrates on his arm and starts to disappear with its traces. The two become extremely sad with the gift that vanished. Surprised, Ahuru starts looking at Estio's arm. Now the flower's light started to shine on his arm. Everyone began to look at the glowing arm. Slowly, the light starts to fade, and Estio touches his wound to check it. He removes the dressings and bandages and discovers that the flower had healing properties. Very happy, Ahuru begins to boast. Estio asks Neju if she saw Suki visiting them the previous night. She replies that Suki had been with them since last night in the carriage. Now he seems to be lying on top of the carriage. Estio begins to reflect that the event of the previous night was not a dream. He puts his clothes back on and opens the moving carriage door. He leans out and stands outside. Worried, the messenger says it's dangerous to do that with a moving carriage. Estio tries to talk to Suki as he knows he is up there. Then Suki appears when called. Because it is dangerous to stay on top of the carriage, Estio asks him to come inside. Unconcerned, Suki sits looking at him. He starts by saying that Estio is more dangerous than he is now. Then he jumps into the carriage. Estio closes the door and the messenger is surprised to see a cat. Confused, he asks if Estio is raising this cat. Denying his question, Estio says that Suki is not a cat with an owner, but he is also not a stray cat. The messenger thinks to himself that it must be another of Estio's friends. Suki asks who the man is, and our protagonist introduces him by the name of Parker. Resting his head on Estio's leg, he asks if his wound is better. He replies that thanks to Ahuru's help, he was healed. Curious, Suki asks what cactus can do. Estio says it was a healing ability. When he was about to say something about Suki following him, he says he wasn't following him and just saw him injured while he was traveling. Given the situation, Estio asks the cat to travel with him from now on. His tail stops out of hesitation. He begins to remember when Estio held him in his arms, and he felt a warm embrace. Because of this, Suki says he will continue following him only because he asked. Knowing his emotions, Estio thanks him. Suki realizes that he has changed, but says to himself that this change is not bad. Finally, the carriage stops and everyone arrives at their destination. Parker calls Estio to look at the portal that connects to the headquarters. It had a golden border and its inside was a mix of red, violet, and purple colors. The guard identified their identity and says that for security reasons, the portal can only be used 3 times a day. Estio didn't hear the side effects of the portal crossing as he looked at one for the first time in front of him. He walks slowly towards it and begins to cross it without speaking to Parker. He closes his eyes due to the sudden light on his face and opens them again as he gets used to the light. He was in front of the headquarters. The others followed behind after he entered. Parker welcomes Estio to the headquarters. He climbed a spiral staircase in the middle. Estio felt as if he were walking to the sky on an infinite staircase. As he climbed, he began to wonder if paradise was really in the sky. The people with power and wealth, and the people who help them. He wonders if things will get better if he keeps climbing. Shaking his head, he pushes those thoughts away. Finally, they reach the top of the staircase. Estio says it was quite quick. Parker responds that the staircase is like a portal and also says that Estio should meet the guild master, but he has been absent for almost 3 months. Instead, it was decided that he would meet the vice master in his place. When he finally reached the office door, Parker presses its doorbell. There are a few moments of silence while they wait. Then he realizes why it is taking so long. Parker says the vice master is sleeping again. Confused, Estio asks if he is really sleeping. Impatiently, Parker starts pressing the doorbell repeatedly. The door opens abruptly from the inside. nearly hitting Ahuru, but Estio pulls him away carefully. They are stunned by the door opening. Ahuru starts to react, realizing that his head could have been taken off by the door. Curious, Estio wonders where Cactus's head is. The Vice Master appears holding a sword. Yawning, he asks who is interrupting his sleep. Noticing Parker in front of him, he looks at him. Saying he didn't order chicken from room service, Parker repeats to the Vice Master that he is not food. Ahuru mocks him for not denying the chicken part. Parker gives up on him and finally says he brought a guest. The Vice Master is curious about what guest he has. He doesn't remember inviting anyone and asks if no one is working downstairs. Saying he will cut his salary for waking him up, Parker becomes very irritated with him. The Vice Master tells him to leave so he can go back to sleep. But a meow catches his attention. Then he sees Suki meowing. He kneels to take a closer look, praising the cat's cuteness. When he's about to pet the cat's head, it turns away and walks over to Estio, who was waiting. Parker introduces Estio as the member of their Galatia branch. The Vice Master stands up upon seeing him. He says that Parker called him a guest, but actually brought the leader of his guild. When Lesky introduces himself to Estio as the Vice Master, they shake hands and Lesky says he is finally meeting the leader from the rumors. Estio is curious why he is being called leader. Lesky then invites them into his room. A completely disorganized place despite the beautiful furniture. Incredulous, Ahuru calls this place a pigsty. Neju worries that if he enters, he will end up stepping on things. Lesky enters and tells him not to worry, since he doesn't mind if they step on his things. Noticing that Neju speaks very well, he asks if he is also half-human. Surprised, Neju asks how he knew, but Lesky says it was a guess. He kneels to Neju's height and says that it was actually a joke. Lesky says that supposing he were an animal, he would want to learn to speak the human language to converse with other humans. Estio consents that Lesky is a very different person inside and out. He offers a coffee, but Estio politely declines. And apologizing to our protagonist, Lesky thinks he might be at the age where he doesn't like bitter things and thinks chocolate might be better. In his mind, Estio says he didn't refuse because of the bitterness. The coffee and chocolate are ready after a while. On the table, there were also some cookies to accompany them. He receives a mug of hot chocolate. Lesky comments that the leader is still quite young. Estio says he has already had his coming-of-age ceremony, but Lesky responds that a true adult doesn't retort when called young but thanks. Parker catches the Vice Master's attention. Curious, Lesky asks what it is. He responds that he seems like an old pervert who likes to play with children, so it would be better to stop that behavior. Shaken by this comment, he starts talking seriously and says it was the guild master's decision to summon the leader to the headquarters. Estio understands but is still in doubt. Why is he called leader? Lesky says it was the master's decision to name him that and he is just passing on what he was told. He doesn't know the exact requirements to become one either. These words don't provide answers to Parker and Estio's confusion. Estio begins to wonder if the guild is a trustworthy place. They act overly secretive, and their stance on things changes constantly, but despite all this, they still haven't lied. Estio can use his powers to notice this, and feels a bit more relieved. Lesky warns him that he will be in charge of different missions than before. Estio asks how different they will be. He responds that they will be special missions that only the leader can do. Then a smile appears on his face. After explaining that the special missions can only be completed if the leader does them, Estio becomes thoughtful about the origin of this new nickname. Something is thrown onto the table between them. A pouch containing a gift for his promotion. The tag had Estio's name on it. Lesky says that inside are his new uniform, emblem, and other things like supplies and coins. Meiju starts to peek inside the pouch. Then he says there's something else, but it's just out of his curiosity and has nothing to do with the guild master. Leaving Estio confused, Lesky says he was curious about the power that made the leader so famous, and he asks for a demonstration. Estio remains quiet for a moment. He picks up his sword that was next to the sofa. In another moment, Lesky is feeling powerless, kneeling on the ground. He can only laugh at his situation. Estio's hot chocolate was put back on the table. The other mug had fallen to the ground, spilling coffee. Lesky considers himself a fool for having considered fighting Estio. The moment he picked up his sword to test his strength, he launched a surprise attack on him. Surprised, Estio did not react to his attack. Confused, Lesky wonders why he is not defending himself. Suddenly, a sword appears with its blade at his neck, but Estio had not even moved from his place. Then he realizes that he himself was holding his sword to his own neck. He couldn't move. Estio says he heard Lesky wanting to see his power. With his eyes glowing, he asks if that demonstration was sufficient. Losing his strength, Lesky falls to his knees on the ground, dropping his sword. Crossing his legs on the table, feeling awful just remembering that he lost without even fighting, he curses the guild master for not explaining better to him. Estio is more of a dictator than a leader. Wondering how the master expects him to contain someone stronger than him, Lesky feels that not being devoured will already be a blessing, but a smile appears on his face. He becomes excited to see that a new era has begun. After walking through the guild building's corridors, Ahuru becomes extremely happy to see a new pot. Quickly, he jumps into the new pot, changing homes. Estio says it's great that Ahuru liked his new gift. He starts looking around the room. It was a very chic room belonging to a noble. They even had cat houses for Tsuki and a bed for Neju. And the porcelain decorations in the room were very beautiful. Estio thought they didn't need to prepare all this for him. Excited, Neju shows Estio the new clothes he had received. Besides boots and other clean sets of clothes, Neju tells him that they are not just clothes. According to the paper he is reading, they were coated with magic, possessing self-cleaning properties, temperature control, shock absorption, and among many other things. Estio begins to wonder if Neju wants to start wearing clothes too. He asks Neju to wait a bit, saying he will go out to see if he can find clothes that fit him and Tsuki. Neju and Tsuki say they don't need clothes, but Estio says they might get cold or feel embarrassed to walk around naked. Tsuki says now, and he's driving him crazy. Tsuki explains that since they have fur, they don't need clothes. Neju starts to explain that people need to wear good clothes to receive good treatment. That's what humans call status. This was the first time Estio heard of this word. He wondered if it would be better if he had status. Responding to him, Neju says that people will like him more if he has status. Estio questions if having a high status will make others like someone more. After all, not everyone likes the king. Neju responds that at least people won't be able to attack him publicly. He says he will protect Estio, but it will be a problem if people stronger than Neju threaten him. Neju remembers when he lost his mother. Estio remains silent in response. He kneels and raises his hands to him, placing his hands on Neju's collar. Removing the collar, he says he will leave it off while no one is around because being chained all the time must be uncomfortable. Neju says the chains don't bother him when he walks, so he wasn't bothered. But Estio says he feels uncomfortable seeing him wear that. Tsuki jumps down for Estio's shoulder. Estio thanks Neju for bringing him the clothes and for being happy for him, and he says that she doesn't need to worry anymore. Realizing that his ability is getting stronger, Estio discovers that he can now make anyone kneel before him. Even that strengthened soldier from the Fabian house was no match for him, and even harpies had no control of their bodies. Estio feels that it is quite convenient. Clenching his hand, he realizes he is a more selfish human being than he thought. Parker appears in the dining hall, announcing that Estio has a request. He hands him a letter with the guild seal, interrupting his meal. Estio thanks Parker. A feather falls into his soup. Parker says he is paid to make deliveries and asks if he has gotten used to the headquarters. He was getting bored with the comfort, but now Estio feels relieved to have received a request. Emotionally, Parker begins to call Estio by his new nickname Leader and says he is very diligent. Estio invites him to have lunch with him and Parker accepts. Even though they call him Leader, Estio doesn't exactly know what he has to do. So he opens the request information and reads the name Higer in the letter. Ahuru says he recognizes that name. It's from a new family of dukes in the nation. The head of the Mubian family is the son of the current emperor and possesses incredible physical abilities. Estio asks if Ahuru has met him, and he has answered yes. Curious, Neju asks what Ahuru said to him. Estio says that Ahuru has already met their next client. Neju begins to praise the cactus, saying it is an amazing plant. Ahuru thanks her and also says that Neju is amazing. Then he says that the Mubian he knows is a bit crazy. Ahuru says he doesn't know much, but he knows his swordsmanship is very good. Estio asks if he is just strong, but Ahuru says no. Mubian is very strong after all. Before becoming the head of the family, he defeated a well-known swordsman with a single blow. Moreover, he also triumphed against many monsters and defeated everyone. Assimilating the information, Estio realizes that even someone as strong as this makes requests to the guild. Parker returned with his plate of food to have lunch with Estio. Our protagonist says that he will like it, but Ahuru notices feathers in the soup and warns Estio. He pats the cactus's head and Parker looks confused. A while after they finish eating, Estio starts reading the request description. As he expected, there weren't many specific details. Estio asks if Parker is done. He says yes, then gets up and leaves. Apprehensively, Parker looks at Estio. He comments that he has noticed Estio is a very reserved person. Estio asks him what he meant by that. Memories of people calling him a monster and expelling him return to his mind. Then Estio begins to remember that it's been a while since the last time he ate with someone else. Walking through the guild corridors, Estio walks at a calm pace, and Parker follows right behind. Apprehensive, Estio stops moving. He turns to look at Parker and asks if he still has work at the headquarters. Parker replies that the letter he had just delivered was his last request, and he has nothing else to deliver for now. Estio asks if he was given a break. Parker says no. This confuses him. Noticing that Estio seems not to have been informed yet, Parker asks to be sure if he knew what the superiors had told him. He asks what they said. Parker replies that he has now been transferred to his team. Confused, Estio asks about the team. Proudly, Parker says that he will now be part of the leader's support team. This means that he is now Estio's subordinate, and Parker raises his hand for a handshake. Hesitating, Estio says he understands what he said. They shake hands as he thinks about the unexpected way he gained a team member and a subordinate simultaneously. Estio begins to see himself as a leader, as his nickname suggests. Parker worries that he might have overwhelmed him too much. Then Estio says that first they need to pack their bags. Curious, Parker asks where they are going. Estio says they are going to meet the client Mubian R. Hygar. They appear again at the teleportation portal. Parker arrives at the portal and says it's just as he thought. While carrying a huge suitcase on his back, he asks if camping equipment will be necessary. Estio and Neju stare at him uncomfortably for carrying such a heavy suitcase. Estio says they won't be camping, but Parker says he brought snacks. He shows salted crackers and baked lemon baguettes. Those were limited edition snacks that he bought with his own money, and he was willing to share them with Estio because he is the leader. But our protagonist politely declines. This leaves Parker tearing up with sadness. Then the portal guard informs them that Higer's territory is out of their reach, so he will have to send them to the Renox underground cave. Parker is concerned about the part about being an underground cave. The guard activates the portal and wishes them a good trip. Estio and the others walk to the portal and cross it. Already used to it, he just walks through the portal. Parker can't help but feel scared of going underground like that. Afraid of being left behind, he runs after them, asking them to wait for him. They exit safely inside the cave. He keeps looking around in fear. Then a voice comes from behind Parker, scaring him a lot. He opens his wings to fly, but hits his head on the cave ceiling, knocking himself out. Everyone looks at the fallen Parker. The bump on his head was making him see stars. The older man says that Parker is quite an energetic pigeon. Then he introduces himself as the portal manager. Estio asks if they are in the Renox underground cave. Surprised by Estio's politeness, he comments aloud. He says that no one has visited this cave for a long time, so he asks what they are doing there. Estio replies that they are heading to Higer's territory. The portal manager warns that there are hardly any adventurers who go to that land of death. Intrigued by this comment, Estio asks why Higer's territory is called that. Answering him, he says that the Emperor did not want to keep his talented cousin close to him since he was someone who surpassed him in everything. The manager asks a rhetorical question about how much of a nuisance he would be to the Emperor. Then he points to a path in the dark cave. He says that even though it is the only base connected to Higer, no one knows what is there. Parker, curious, asks why no one knew. The manager says that means he will let them pass but will not guarantee their safety, leaving Parker scared. The territory that the Emperor gave to the Duke was a land full of deadly monsters. Summarizing the Emperor's story, the manager says that the kitty was just scared and very afraid of his own cousin. While hiding behind Estio, he sees the manager laughing at his own joke. Estio starts looking around, and then looks back at the manager. He realizes that he is neither scared nor disturbed. Then Estio begins to use his powers. The manager approaches them, warning Estio to be careful, and tells him to do his best not to attract the attention of the fearful king, unless he wants to be devoured before even cracking the shell of his egg. Estio asks him to pass a message to the Emperor. He will gladly accept his welcome, and that when the time comes, he can speak freely with him without the need to hide. Then he walks straight, disappearing into the cave's shadows. The manager stood silent. Then he starts laughing uncontrollably. He repeats Estio's words, "Speak freely without the need to hide." The old man begins to peel off his skin mask, and a young appearance is revealed. Magic lamps light up and illuminate the cave. Estio and his friends walk cautiously. Parker shakes his head, showing that he is very nervous. Seeing the frightened look on his companion's face, Estio timidly apologizes for not knowing he was afraid of underground caves. Parker asks how he knew, but then he remembers that Estio can read his mind. Estio apologizes for doing so without asking for permission, but Parker reassures him, saying that it's not a problem since he is the leader. Parker says it's not fear, but a racial trait. This information intrigues Estio, who wants to know more. Avians are a race that normally lives in high mountains and hills. Because of this, they feel uncomfortable in places where their freedom to fly is taken away. That's why Parker's reaction was that of a scared person. In a narrow place like this, his race has difficulties. Since this tunnel is directly connected to the Higer territory, Estio says it shouldn't take more than half a day of walking to reach their destination. He took the liberty of choosing the path through the cave due to the daily limitations of using the portal. This method is certainly more efficient, but Estio says it's his fault for choosing alone without consulting his team members. Parker disagrees, saying that he is the leader and the leader only needs to give orders. Upon hearing the word orders, Estio hesitates. He asks if Parker will follow his orders regardless of his will. Hearing Parker's confirmation, Estio thinks this is no different from controlling his mind. Unconcerned, Parker says it's not against his will. He's here because he wanted to follow Estio. After all, not only is Estio his superior, but he was also the one who saved his life. Estio responds that he only did it because his life was in danger too. But even so, Parker thanks him, as he would have died if it weren't for Estio. While they were talking, Neju sensed something ahead. His growl made Parker afraid. The sound of monsters could be heard from the dark front of the cave. Estio asks Neju to confirm, and he responds that there are several monsters, and they are fast. Hearing this conversation, Parker gets scared. He asks how close the monsters are. Neju says they are right below, and the ground begins to crack at that very moment. The yellow creature reveals its form. Recognizing that silhouette, Parker stammers as he says the monster's name. Finally discovered by the earth, it is revealed to be earthworms. Confused, Estio wonders if they are giant worms. Homer gets excited because it's the first time he has seen these monsters. He says that as long as they don't attack first, the worms won't be aggressive. Using his two little arms to gesture, Ahura points at them, saying they are just watching. The earthworms remain in the same hole they came out of, without attacking. And to add, Ahura says they have no reason to attack. They are neither carnivores nor herbivores. Curious, Estio asks what they eat, and he responds that it's dirt. With its mouth open, the worm puts some dirt into its mouth. Then it starts chewing the dirt. Estio and Niju watch this scene disinterestedly. But Parker's reaction is still that of a scared person. Ahura teases him, calling him a little crying chicken, even though he cannot be heard. After some time observing the worms, Estio says they are letting them pass. Crying, Parker asks if they aren't going to eat them, but they respond that the worms probably don't eat humans. Without fear, he walks in a straight line. And to calm his companions, he says they were just curious because it had been a long time since someone crossed this path. Surprised, Estio says he heard them say they were responsible for the construction of this cave. After passing, he calls Parker to come to his side too. But Parker was still very afraid of being swallowed by the worms. They still squirm without having any idea of the young avian's thoughts. His body trembled just by being close to them. Seeing his friend's difficulty, Estio thought of helping him. But Parker says he doesn't need help. He was just going to ask the little monsters to move to the side, but it seems he missed that chance. Crossing that bed of worms proved to be a difficult task. In the end, Parker and Niju got completely dirty with dirt and monster droppings. Estio says it doesn't smell that bad, but Parker disagrees. Seeing Parker's lying face, he realizes that even a powerful ability user like Estio cannot lie. After passing the earthworms, Parker realizes he misinterpreted the information about the Rinox underground cave. The story is that there aren't many visitors because there are monsters that attack people. But even though the worms smelled bad and were strange, they still behaved nicely. Estio asks if he is still afraid even knowing they won't attack. Parker responds that they are so disgusting that they are scary. Unlike Parker, he says he found the worms cute, climbing up to where they were just to see them and wriggling their large bodies. It has been 3 hours since they entered the cave. Parker supposes they must be close to their destination and says he wants to get rid of the bad smell as quickly as possible. Sensing a freshwater scent, Niju says there is water nearby. He points in a direction where he can feel clean water and hear the sound of a waterfall. At the end of the cave, there is a bright opening. Entering deeper into it, they can see a waterfall inside the cave. When they encounter the waterfall in front of them, they are fascinated by the place and decide to approach it. Estio kneels, taking some of that water in his hands, and confirming that it is clean, he warns his companions to be careful, just in case. Completely ignored by Niju, who then jumps into the water without a second thought. The group, who were apprehensive because they didn't know if there was any danger there, now breathes a sigh of relief, seeing that they really seem to be safe. Niju calls Estio to join him in the water, and Parker reminds him that he should take this moment to bathe the cat as well, who doesn't seem very happy with the idea because he doesn't like water. But since he might even get sick, Parker keeps insisting on the idea of a bath while Suki listens to everything and curses the boy, calling him a damn pigeon. With no choice, Suki decides to bathe on his own, even against his will. But before he could put his paws in the water, he is suddenly grabbed by something that pulls him up, making him end up in Parker's arms ready for a dive. He uses his super flying dive technique and plunges into the waterfall with the cat in his arms. Estio, who was also entering the water, notices that after diving, his cat is now perched on top of Parker's head, with his face submerged in the water. Quickly, he runs out of the water and hides behind Estio near the entrance of the waterfall. The cat, furious with the pigeon for what he had done, starts complaining, and Estio says that at least his fur is clean now and begins to dry him off. Meanwhile, Parker gets up and asks Suki if he liked the surprise, which threatened his life while being held in the protagonist's arms. Estio warns that Suki was startled by his behavior and that he needs to apologize to him because of that, promising not to do that again without the cat's consent. Parker awkwardly apologizes, putting his hand on his head, saying that next time he will warn him about the super dive before doing it. And Estio reminds the group that they should get back on the road because they have no time to lose. At that moment, Ahura tries to draw attention to himself, saying he is thirsty, and the boy responds by saying there's water right next to him. But apparently that doesn't please the little cactus, who seems to want something else to feed on. Estio then asks what it could be, and Ahura explains that it's something stronger with a unique and delicious texture, making the boy wonder how the cactus's diet had changed in recent days. While he thinks about it, Ahura then decides to place his hand on his companion, asking him to raise his spines. The cactus doesn't quite understand at first, but he follows his orders anyway. And pricking the boy's hand, blood begins to drip into his pot. Parker, who was approaching Estio bringing his cloak, asks what he was doing when he sees this scene in front of him. Estio informs him that he's just feeding the cactus, and that his companion doesn't need to worry about the bleeding in his hand. With Ahura satisfied, they head out while talking about who might have made that waterfall. Parker assumes that the place wasn't created by the worms, but by another being that once lived there. Estio asks why he thinks that, and Parker explains that caves like that usually already have owners living inside. For example, tigers, wolves, or even dragons. The protagonist, not knowing much about the subject, asks curiously if dragons also live in caves, and Parker continues giving details, also informing that the body of a dragon is much larger than the cave, making it unlikely that one of these creatures lived there before. He also mentions the two forms that the strongest dragons among the draconic beings possess, one being the creature's known form and the other that of an ordinary human. SGO, surprised, asks if Parker was really saying that dragons lived transformed as humans in the past, unable to believe it. And Parker continues his explanation, saying that it was as if these creatures had two bodies, being a race truly loved by God. As the sacred scripture said that the form of man was the form of God, dragons also had a second form that was created based on the divine form. But to truly confirm all of this, they first needed to find one. SGO was unaware of all this because he had never been to a religious temple before, which surprises Parker because, in his view, all villagers should have a small place of worship in their homes. The protagonist explains that he lived in a very poor place in a mountain town, and even though the inhabitants of his city were loved by God, in the end, it didn't really matter. Because no matter how strong they were, they all ended up being extinct without leaving a single trace behind. Parker corrects the boy, saying he seems to have misunderstood the information, explaining that it was actually the opposite. The dragons themselves had abandoned this world and gone to another place. And although they were called guardians, these creatures were the top predators of the food chain, with no one powerful enough to subjugate them. SGO asks if they hadn't been killed by humans, feeling confused with all the new information. And Parker replies that it wasn't possible. The real reason was actually the unstoppable progress that humans possessed, leading to many subsequent wars because of it. The dragons, who observe everything, wept as they watched their world become corrupted until God decided to give them one last choice. The creatures could either stay as guardians or leave this planet and go to another home by their own will, which ended up being their choice. None of this was truly proven, only told through the sacred scriptures that he knew. The only thing truly proven was the love that God had for dragons, possibly even greater than his love for humans. And suddenly, Neju interrupts the two, saying that something was coming towards the group. Clenching his teeth, he says that the new creatures weren't as friendly as the worms, having bad intentions. In the darkness of the cave, they see something moving, and some paws start to appear, revealing a pack of cave wolves in front of them, who seemed irritated. Parker, scared, says that they were probably just passing by. But Uhuru, without lowering his guard, informs Estio that the creatures seemed more sensitive at the moment due to the hunger they felt. While they were talking, trying to analyze the situation for a possible confrontation, one of the wolves appears above them, already making the first move. Neju knocks out some wolves, holding the cactus in his hands, while the rest of them had already surrounded the group from all sides. Then one of them charges, aiming for his blind spot. But with his instincts awakened, he perceives the wolf's movement behind him and turns, ready, swinging his left arm towards the animal's head. He hits it squarely and ends up with blood on his claws. The wolves stare at him, seeing what had happened to one of their own. And Estio takes advantage of this moment of distraction to counterattack with his power. The wolves then sit by his side while Neju runs towards him, pleased with his leader's action. Estio seems unwilling to sacrifice the wolves there for nothing, discovering that they lived in a pack. Instead, he takes possession of the pack's leadership, causing the wolves to howl towards their new commander. After a long sign of respect from the wolves, they bow to the group, accepting them as their superiors, who then decide to head towards their destination. Right after finally cleaning themselves in the waterfall, Neju was already dirty again because of all that. But he didn't care, because to solve the problem, he just needed to clean himself again. Parker and Neju introduce themselves to each other to get to know one another better, while Estio, a bit further ahead, finally seems to have found the exit. A small opening in the cave shows some trees on the other side in an open grassy field. Looking ahead, Parker is amazed by what he sees. A giant white castle with blue details at its tips and an entrance gate in the center, pointing towards the adventurers. They wonder if they've arrived in the territory of Hygar. The place, which was so large that it almost looked like a small city, also had some guards armed with spears spread across its walls. Seeing some cannons ready to be used resting on the ground, Estio wonders if that place was really the territory of Hagar. The ground suddenly begins to tremble, making Parker think that an earthquake might be happening. But Neju, familiar with the situation, asks them to observe a detail, turning his head to the left as if pointing in a direction. A march of soldiers on horseback with flags raised high was advancing towards them. Many of them were soldiers, and a man who seemed to be the commander of that group approached, leading all the others. Parker, surprised by the number of soldiers in front of them, comments on the situation as they draw closer, asking Estio if he is the leader of the Ignis Guild, to which he then responds. The man informs that the Lord is expecting the boy to enter the city while being escorted by the guards. The workers who lived in the area, upon seeing this unfold, are astonished by the situation. And noticing that a member of the Ignis Guild was present, they are impressed with the group, which at first glance appears to be very strong. They then wonder why they had suddenly appeared. If it were for a battle, they would be ready to help the group immediately, and they begin to show how much they love the place they live in by raising their fists in the air, ready to fight to protect their city. This catches Estio's attention for some reason. He comments that the territory is wonderful, and the soldier questions what makes him feel that way about the place, to which he responds that it is because of the hearts of the people around him. Concluding his statement, he continues thinking and shares a bit about how he feels seeing the residents react in that way. It was something he would never do because he had never felt the desire to protect his homeland. Inside the palace, we finally see some chandeliers hanging from a ceiling far above them with the staircase below, and some windows with artwork of people forming a three-dimensional image from the protagonist's perspective. As they climb the stairs, the guard in front of them suddenly apologizes to the group, then says that from this point on, only their leader is allowed to continue, describing the rules of the place and how things work. With no choice, Estio decides to go alone to the meeting, which makes Neju uneasy about the situation, not wanting the group to be separated. But the boy tries to calm his companion, saying that he would try to be as quick as possible, asking them to wait for him just for a few moments and nothing more. Neju agrees, but makes it clear to Estio that if anything happens, he only needs to call out, staying alert for anything that might occur. Parker also chimes in, saying that he would take care of everything there. But before he can finish his sentence, Estio closes the entrance completely, leaving the pigeon literally talking to the door, not caring about his words. This makes Parker sad, and Neju now has to take care of him. Even worried about his companions being alone for the first time, he continues walking. Thinking about the situation, he starts deciding what to do when, out of nowhere, he is surprised by a Huru, who appears right in front of him, jumping nonstop. And seeing the cactus, he remembers that Neju used to hold his companion most of the time. But for some reason, at a specific moment, he had disappeared from his hands. While pondering this, he is interrupted by a man sitting at a table in front of him wearing glasses, who was holding something in his hands and asking if he didn't already know the boy. Estio approaches him, and they begin to converse until the cactus also catches the man's attention, appearing right beside him, introducing himself, saying his name and that he was a real cactus. The man, disturbed by the scene, tries to scream, but his desperation is so great that he chokes on his own voice the first time, and the second time he lets out all his despair with a scream that could be heard throughout the entire city. Akuru also starts screaming back at the man because he ends up getting scared by his reaction, together turning the place into a complete mess. Seeing all of this, Estio closes his eyes and puts his hand on his head due to the situation that had suddenly gotten completely out of control. Some guards enter the place running, asking their lord what the problem was, which makes him regain his concentration as he looks at them, surprised. He then calms down and explains that nothing actually happened, asking them to return to their posts. The soldiers, not understanding anything, ignore the screams and obey the lord's order, returning to their places and closing the door of the place as they leave. The man then begins to talk to the cactus, thinking that the leader was actually him, and tries to start a conversation with Ahuru, still impressed by what he could do, even though he was just a plant. The cactus, indignant with the man in front of him, asks if the man was stupid, who simply ignores his insults, calling him rude. And seeing this person in front of him, Ahuru declares with full certainty that the idiot talking to him definitely couldn't be a duke. Estio interrupts the two and introduces himself as the true leader of the guild, asking about what he had mentioned earlier regarding already knowing him. The man then looks at him and claims that it was actually nothing. Continuing the conversation, the man says he wasn't aware that Estio could disguise himself as a cactus. Estio explains that, in fact, he hadn't done that, but is suddenly confronted as the man reveals his real doubt. Asking random questions, the man seemed to be trying to gather some information from the boy without him realizing it at first, showing himself to be quite intelligent. Because of this, Estio is surprised and questions how much the man already knows about his life. The man tries to change the subject, saying that it was just a guess, while analyzing the boy and noticing that his presence in the place was indeed significant. He then finally decides to introduce himself as Mubianar Hagar. After introducing himself, he extends his hand to greet him with a small black sword hanging at his waist. Estio also introduces himself on behalf of his guild, shaking Mubian's hand, who then mentions that he is curious about one thing, turning his gaze toward Ahuru. He is intrigued by the cactus, wanting to understand better what he inadvertently calls a monster. Hearing this, Ahuru gets irritated and starts chasing the man around the table, which leaves Mubian even more confused by the small creature. Estio calls his companion closer, extending his hand, and the cactus immediately runs towards him, obeying his command. He asks the Duke if he could also hear what Ahuru was saying at that moment, to which Mubian naturally replies yes, then counters his question by asking why he wouldn't be able to do that. Estio, with this, presumes that Mubian has a similar ability to his own, but Mubian informs him that he doesn't actually have such an ability, adding that he doesn't even know what the boy is talking about, and that if he had heard it, his sword might have been understandable, because he had carried it for a long time. Estio, not understanding the reason for this, becomes curious about the information. The Duke explains that some connections grow stronger through blood, and he considers the possibility that the cactus might have ingested his leader Estio's blood earlier, finally deducing what happened there. He then begins to explain that it was definitely Estio's power that allowed the plant to be heard by others, and these abilities could be activated in various ways, but if enough blood was consumed, you wouldn't even need to ask a cactus to do anything. Surprised by all of this, Estio responds to the man, who seemed to know more about him than Estio himself, who now tries to clear up the misunderstanding by saying that he only had some information about the boy that had been gathered over the years. With this new information, Estio begins to wonder if other people might also have that ability registered, and Mubian promptly responds that there actually were, saying that it was all just a hypothesis, giving some information about traits that were passed down through his family over generations. Estio is confused by what he hears from the Duke, and suddenly Mubian draws his sword, pointing it at Estio, and then mentioning two specific characteristics: black eyes and a monstrous ability. With the speculation among the people in the place, it was rumored that the Hygar family might be direct descendants of the Black Dragons. Humuru, upon hearing the man's words, isn't surprised at all, saying that it was actually the man's ego that was too big. The man, hearing this, tries to say something but ends up putting his hand on his head as if he was starting to feel unwell. Seeing this, Estio asks what happened to the Duke, who responds that he could feel the essence of the Black Dragon awakening in his veins. The scene leaves the Huru still uncertain about the man, urging them to leave quickly. Mubian then apologizes, saying that it was just a joke and that he wasn't a black dragon, with everything being just old rumors that existed. He explains that these rumors were also related to his request to the guild. Estio asks what that request was, and the Duke hands him a blue bag, informing that he would like Estio to find a true descendant of these dragons. The protagonist is taken by surprise by this request, while Mubian points his finger and continues his speech, saying that if the boy helped him for a month, that request would be considered fulfilled regardless of the final outcome, and then asking him to follow without worry. Estio is confused about the Duke embarking on an adventure, leaving his duties behind, but it seemed that he had already planned everything in advance. He also mentions that he isn't a combatant, leading Estio and asks if he would take a guard with them on the journey. The Duke responds that he doesn't need one, while highlighting the sword at his waist, because if they consider only swordsmanship, he was the best fighter in the entire empire. The more time Uhuru spends near the Duke, the more disgusted he feels, calling the man cringe with every phrase that comes out of his mouth. The Duke concludes his speech by warning that if anyone dared to interrupt his work, it would be they who should worry about their own safety, no matter who they were. He heads toward the door, and as he touches the doorknob, Estio, hearing his thoughts where the man even shows a willingness to face the Supreme Emperor, questions him, asking the real reason for that specific quest of his. And guessing that the boy had read his mind, excited by the idea, the Duke explains that the request wasn't from the Duke of that nation, but rather a more personal request from him. Estio now seems to understand his objectives better as the man reaffirms that his family wasn't of draconic lineage, but that there was indeed black dragon blood mixed in his family's DNA, because one of his ancestors had ingested it before gaining such powers. He then opens the door he was holding, finding Estio's group waiting on the other side, conversing among themselves, commenting on the similarities between the group and a cactus, which irritates Uhuru once again. Estio begins walking towards them, ready to start the journey, and asks the Duke what their first destination would be upon leaving. But confusingly, the man seems not to have a place in mind, saying that over the next month he would actually just be observing Estio. He then reveals that he is, in fact, the person from the Black Dragon lineage that he was searching for. The protagonist is surprised by that claim, and everyone falls silent for a moment upon hearing the Duke say that. He continues his story, stating that the natural powers of black dragons with shadow attributes are based on mental energy that dominates the desire for life. He explains that Estio's abilities were too similar to be mere coincidences. Estio finds it hard to believe what he is hearing, while the Duke admits that he only called him there because he assumed the connection he might have with the dragons. And with that said, he informs them that he will be accompanying their group for a month. Cutting the scene, we enter another location. We see someone searching for Mubian, who turns out to be a woman in a blue dress with long red hair. In what seems to be an image from Mubian's mind, we see someone approaching him to converse warmly. The person, who turns out to be the same woman from before, appears to be caring for the boy, who seems to trust her quite a bit. With the child in her arms, she begins to tell a story about the blood of dragons flowing in the boy's veins, which immediately piques his curiosity. Excited to share this, she explains that it was a gift from the Black Dragon, known to be the most noble and beautiful in the world. The boy confronts the woman, saying that his grandfather had told him a different story, about dragons no longer existing on that planet. She contradicts this theory, explaining that dragons could indeed have disappeared from there due to all the problems and complications that arose, but it was said that the dragon who shared its blood with their family had not yet completely left that world. And the proof of this was their family lineage, which had always possessed great strength because of it. The boy, with all his innocence, is fascinated to learn all this and asks if the dragon hadn't died of old age. And she explains that being the guardians of that place, they would neither age nor fall ill, making it impossible for one of them to die. And as she bids farewell to her son, who was getting ready for bed, she concludes the story by saying that he was certainly protecting everyone there from somewhere. Mubian doesn't believe her because he doesn't want to accept the fact that the dragon was really protecting them personally, because that would mean they were weak in the end. Compared to a dragon, humans were indeed too fragile, but if they lived diligently, continuing the legacy and history of their family, they would be the last evidence of a dragon's existence in this world. Curious since he was a child, Mubian then asks why that dragon decided to stay while all the others chose to leave. Smiling, she responds that it was because the creature's love for humans was too great. Mubian suddenly wakes from his sleep and rises in the camp, realizing that he was just experiencing a memory. He places his hand on his head. Estio, who is also awake, asks about the dream Mubian had as if he knew something. The Duke is startled that the boy was still awake at that hour, and Estio tells him that he had also just woken up like him. Not understanding how Estio had seen his dream, Mubian asks if he was talking in his sleep or something similar, but Estio explains that he had slept normally. Seeing the protagonist standing by the campfire, they continue to converse until Mubian begins to recall Jiraiya again for some reason. Although the woman and Estio were completely different, they still shared some similarities in their personalities, as could be noted. They resume their conversation, and Estio explains a bit more about his basic ability, which is the power to read the hearts of others. He mentions that when someone starts having a dream due to a significant memory, sometimes even against his will, he invades that person's dream. Knowing this, Mubian then connects the dots, realizing that Estio had witnessed everything he had imagined while asleep. Estio then compliments Mubian's mother on her incredible beauty, which seems to please the Duke, who appreciates the compliment for someone dear to him. He says that she was a very wise person, even though she was no longer present in this world. He then asks the boy if he wasn't going to go back to sleep since he had only rested for an hour. Estio responds that he suffers from insomnia, and recalling some disturbing scenes that troubled his mind. Mubian also says that he had slept enough, deciding not to close his eyes again that day. Everyone in the group except for the two of them is sprawled on the ground asleep around the campfire. Mubian continues talking a bit more with Estio about his dream and then about his stepmother named Jiraiya. She was his father's second wife, but he thought of her as his true mother since his biological mother had died shortly after giving birth to him. He refers to Jiraiya as his beloved little star, just as she used to call him when he was a child. Remembering this dear person, he seems to recall things he failed to accomplish in the past. He tells the story of the day when a monster invasion occurred. They suddenly appeared in the city with the fall of night, and while Mubian was searching for his stepmother, a blood-stained claw could be seen. He then says that everyone had died that night except for him. After that, he lies down on the ground feeling dejected and comments that if the dragon really exists, he would ask it what he needs to protect now that there is nothing left. Wishing he didn't have all that power, he seems to lament his life, saying that if everything was going to end like that, he would prefer the Higar family lineage to disappear. Estio, noticing that Mubian's mind was full of thoughts, interrupts his train of thought by simply telling him to rest. After all, since there was nothing left to protect, he could at least take the opportunity to sleep peacefully from now on. And that if a person didn't sleep well, many futile thoughts like the ones Mubian was having would invade their mind. Hearing all this, Mubian begins to question a few things about the boy beside him, saying that the day's nightmares had finally ended. And trusting him, he recalls that the boy could hear the hearts of others, falling asleep shortly after and gaining even more understanding of what he had already discovered about Estio. The night passes and a new day dawns. As a meal is being prepared at the camp, Mubian wakes up again after managing to rest, and he is surprised by the boy's mental abilities, having slept for so many hours straight after a long period of his life in which that wasn't possible. Ahuru approaches him upon noticing that Mubian had woken up and without wasting much time starts insulting the Duke as he hadn't taken a liking to him before. They exchange a few quick words while Parker approaches from the background calling everyone to eat, bringing some bowls of food in his hands. He informs them that today's dish would be corn soup with cheese and ham. But when Mubian receives his meal, he doesn't see any of the ingredients mentioned by the pigeon and asks what it really is. Parker then tells him that it's actually milk soup with potatoes, cheese, and broccoli. Changing the description entirely, leaving the Duke confused about Parker's cooking abilities, he asks Parker if what he made was just some kind of mush with whatever was left in his bag. But the pigeon denies it, saying that his 20 years as a cook wouldn't allow him to make something like that. Mubian, seeing the boy's appearance, curiously asks how old Parker is since he has 20 years of experience in the kitchen. Parker responds that he is 21 years old, having learned to cook in his first year of life, starting with making his own baby food. The cactus, contradicting Mubian's doubts, says that it makes total sense because by 1 year old, it could already fly around on their own. This prompts Parker to share a few more details about himself while proudly boasting about all his skills. Mubian cuts him off and then asks where the group's leader is. Parker, looking away and pretending not to know the answer, awkwardly avoids the question. He tries again to get information from Parker, who responds that there's no problem with the leader wanting to be alone, especially after hearing the story about his abilities being similar to a dragon's. Mubian asks when Estio disappeared from the camp, and Parker replies that it's been a while. But since Estio is the leader, nothing bad would happen to him. The Duke starts trembling with fear, explaining that the area is still not a safe place, regretting not having warned Estio to be careful. Parker is surprised by this information, while Mubian explains some details about the surroundings of Hygar, containing various types of potential enemies. And because of that, without a guard accompanying the group, only Mubian would be able to ensure everyone's safety. Focusing his vision, he tries to see through the trees of the forest to locate Estio, fortunately spotting him within moments, relieved that nothing bad had happened. Parker suggests that they should go find their leader as soon as possible, but Mubian volunteers to do it, telling them to wait there. He takes a giant leap into the air, surprising the pigeon. He advances carrying his sword in his right hand until he begins to smell blood in the area. He then approaches Estio, asking if the boy is okay. Estio turns to see who had arrived. The Duke finds some cave wolves that were not common in that area and asks why those creatures were with Estio. Not understanding the situation, he imagines that it might be the result of Estio's mental domination and asks simply if Estio was ready to leave. The Duke mentions that they were still having lunch and Estio decides to return to the camp. However, curious about the boy, Mubian questions what he was doing isolated there. Estio shows him an injured wolf in his lap that he had found earlier inside the caves. Its pack lived in the cave, but after they left with the group, they had suffered greatly at the hands of humans. Mubian says that it makes sense because for the Hygar territory, wild animals would be considered a problem, and thus they had to be eliminated. The Renox cave system was the only route linked to the outside world that Hygar territory had, and to ensure the safety of the area, it was necessary to remove the beasts and monsters. After all, if no one did this, defenseless people trying to visit the territory would be devoured by them. Ignoring Estio's situation, Mubian simply advises him to leave them there to live or die, as it wouldn't make any difference in the end. But then, noticing a strange smell, Mubian realizes something different and asks Estio if he'd have fed the injured wolf pup with his blood. Estio responds that he did, saying that in a previous case, his blood had helped another injured animal. Hearing this, the Duke tries to warn him that it wouldn't be a good idea to give his own blood so easily, because if he really was a dragon descendant, his blood would have the power to tame living creatures and turn them into the Black Dragon's personal guardians. Realizing that he was saying too much, Mubian advises him once again to not help the wolves and let the pack fend for themselves from now on. Although he agrees with the Duke's words, Estio seems to find a solution to the problem on both sides, suggesting the possibility that the wolves could promise not to harm the people of Hygar anymore, and then questioning the Duke, asking what the animals would gain in return for respecting this agreement. Mubian recalls that long ago the Black Dragon would intervene in disputes between humans and non-humans, perhaps bringing him closer to his real objective. Mubian explains that merely promising that the wolves wouldn't attack the citizens wouldn't be enough. Instead, he offers them shelter and food in his kingdom in exchange for their strength. After sealing the agreement, everyone returns to the camp at last. Parker is startled by the wolves now following Estio and Mubian as they return together. Estio informs the group that the wolves would be their new companions from now on, along with the Duke. But Parker seems hesitant to trust the pack and is reluctant to share his food with them. While the pigeon complains, Neju approaches the wolves with a cheerful expression. He speaks to Estio, noting that the animal in his arms is just a pup, to which Estio agrees, adding that the poor creature was also injured. With a bad feeling, the boy had taken the pup from its mother to try to save its life. Worried about its condition, he asks Parker if he could help by checking on the wolf. Parker agrees to help as long as no surgery is required, and laying out his materials on a cloth spread on the ground, he begins the treatment. Within moments, Parker notices that the wolf had no visible wounds on its body. If a pup of that size had really been struck by an arrow, it would have pierced right through the animal. But the spot where the wound should have been showed something so minor that it didn't seem serious at all. The wolf's body temperature was also normal, indicating that it was just resting to regain its energy. With this diagnosis, Parker asks Estio if he was really sure that the wolf had been hit by an arrow, and Estio responds that he wasn't certain. As he hides the arrow behind his back, Estio stands up, saying that he might have been mistaken or confused it with another wolf. He tries to conceal what had really happened so that his companions wouldn't know about his abilities, while Mubian silently observes everything. Noticing that Mubian was aware of the arrow he was hiding beneath his cloak, Estio asks the Duke to remain silent. Mubian, not understanding why the boy didn't want his companions to know that he was indeed special, stays quiet. Time passes at the camp, and as the fire dies down, we see Suki sleeping in the trees. Someone then wakes the cat by calling his name, informing him that they would be leaving soon. As he turns to his companions, he now sees a group of wolves staring directly at him. Suki, upon seeing this, asks why those vermin were present as well. Estio explains that they would be their new traveling companions. The cat jumps onto Estio's head, not fully understanding the situation, asking him if those wolves were new comrades. Estio replies that the wolves are the new residents of Hygar who could now legally live there. Licking his paws, Suki calms his instincts and asks the boy what their next destination would be. Mubian interrupts the conversation, saying that he had already decided on the next destination, though he hadn't informed the group, feeling a bit awkward about it. Parker asks when he made that decision, and Mubian responds that it was at that very moment. Turning to Estio, Mubian asks a few questions about his homeland, already knowing some details about his life. Estio says that his village is called Selbia, and the Duke, upon hearing this, declares that it would be their next destination. Everyone is shocked by this, and Haru, who already disliked the man, becomes even more displeased, calling the Duke a pervert after trying to figure out his intentions. Estio asks why Mubian would want to visit his homeland, and Mubian begins to explain that at first he only intended to observe the boy, but from what he had noticed, Estio didn't know enough about himself yet. Knowing this, Mubian wanted to meet the people who raised Estio, believing he could discover more about him that way. Estio begins to recall moments from his childhood, remembering that, in fact, the people who raised him weren't his real parents. But that wasn't the real issue. The real reason was that he didn't want to meet those people again, closing his eyes with a fearful expression. Showing no empathy, the Duke approaches the boy, who seemed more emotional, and tells him that he should follow the client's request without complaining. Estio regains control of his mind and agrees that the man was right, setting off towards their next objective. Time passes, and they arrive at a branch of the Ignis Guild called Galatia. Upon entering an establishment, they are greeted by the guild manager named Hawk, who asks his leader if he had been eating well recently. Seeing all the formality in Hawk's tone when addressing him, Estio asks his old acquaintance to speak to him as he used to before. Hawk tries to explain that since Estio had become his new leader, he was now his subordinate, but Estio interrupts, asking him kindly to drop the formalities. With that, Hawk feels more at ease and asks the boy how he's been doing, apparently happy to be visited by him unexpectedly. They begin to chat as they walk, and Hawk mentions that he always knew Estio would become a star because he had a good eye for such things. Now, treating his friend normally, the guild manager starts jokingly asking Estio for a raise or some rewards for his high-quality service. A girl suddenly appears, covering Hawk's mouth to stop him from saying those things in front of the guild leader, and introduces herself to Estio. The girl asks Estio if he is indeed planning to go to Selbia in the river region. She reminds him that the mountain is quite far from their current location, and the group actually has a challenging journey ahead. If they were to walk, it would take a long time to get there, so she and Hawk offer him a carriage. The boy thanks them for the help, and they decide to spend the rest of the day resting there. As night approaches, Estio is seen sitting on his bed, thinking about how everything there is exactly the same as it was the day he left. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. The boy asks who it is but receives no answer. Estio wasn't expecting any visitors, so he approaches the door cautiously, wondering who it could be. But the person opens the door suddenly, revealing it to be the girl from earlier named Rosalind. She asks Estio if she interrupted his rest, and he responds that she didn't. Rosalind then asks if Estio knows how to ride a horse. He admits that he has never learned, which is unfortunate since the guild doesn't have any carriages available, having already rented out all they had. With only horses left, she could provide some for the group, but since he doesn't know how to ride, they would need to consider another option. Estio informs her that it wouldn't be a problem since the duration of the request is a month, giving them time to travel on foot. Rosalind, still wanting to help, offers to gather some guards to accompany him, but Estio declines. The girl doesn't quite understand his refusal, so Estio explains that even though he isn't skilled in combat, he is accompanied by his client who has self-proclaimed himself the strongest swordsman and can rely on him for safety during the journey. Mubian, who is eavesdropping on their conversation, becomes irritated at Estio's use of the words self-proclaimed, feeling mocked. Rosalind, on the other hand, is pleased to hear this and says that if he needs anything else, he just has to ask. Parker then raises his hand, taking advantage of the conversation, and mentions that he has something to share with them. He points out that the group's food supplies are running low and their utensils are also too worn out to be used again, suggesting that it would be a good idea to replace everything with new items. Rosalind asks Parker to accompany her to the office so she can explain the guild's procedure for obtaining those supplies. The two leave, chatting, and Mubian takes the opportunity to announce that he's going to visit the weapons shop. The group bids farewell to the Duke, who remains standing in front of them, then admits that he doesn't really want to go there alone, glancing at Estio. The boy tries to explain that he doesn't know anything about the weapons shop, even though he's familiar with the people and places there. This makes Mubian curious, prompting him to ask Estio more questions about it. Estio explains that he was never a member of the combat guild, having only worked in the support department's special division, so he had never needed to hold a sword or anything similar. Understanding Estio better, the Duke asks if the boy has no idea how to use a weapon, to which Estio responds that he doesn't. Still curious, Mubian asks more questions about Estio's childhood, noting that it wasn't spent in a rural village where hunting would be a common activity. Estio informs him that he never had the desire to go out and hunt beasts. Mubian seizes the opportunity to ask if Estio had ever killed anyone before, causing the boy to avert his gaze and recall some moments from his past. With soldiers and blood-stained blades on the ground, Estio responds to the Duke that yes, he has killed humans before. Hearing the boy's response, Mubian realizes that even though Estio presents himself as peaceful, he still possesses a certain resolve. For someone who claimed never to have broken a chicken's neck, he shows himself to be capable of taking a human life if necessary. Even though he isn't a combatant, Mubian acknowledges that the boy has great power, but insists that it would still be better for him to carry a weapon during the journey. Humans are more fragile than they seem, Mubian says, adding that this should be considered a client's request, which should be followed as an order. Resigned to go to the weapon shop, Estio sighs and asks Neju and Ahuru to wait for Parker to return right where they are. Neju expresses a desire to go to the shop as well, but Estio declines, telling him to rest a bit there. As they part ways, Ahuru, looking at Suki, asks why the tiger is coming along. Estio explains to the cactus that Suki would follow him regardless, so it would be pointless to try and stop him. Suki, pleased that his leader knows him so well, confidently joins them, with no one daring to interfere with his actions. The two of them walk to the shop. When they arrive, Mubian opens the door, looking for someone inside. A man appears, surprised to see someone in the shop, and asks who had entered. The Duke responds that it's just a customer. The man then stands up and realizes that he had forgotten to lock the door before starting to clean the place. He then says that he wouldn't be selling anything that day and asks them to leave the establishment. As usual, Mubian begins questioning the man, asking why he wasn't selling anything. The merchant explains that Viscount Fabien had swept through the shop recently, and even after taking everything he had, it still wasn't enough for the man. The Viscount seemed to be recruiting soldiers, which left him short on equipment. Because of this, finding weapons in that city could become difficult due to his actions. Estio asks if the man was indeed recruiting soldiers, and the merchant recognizes him as a guild member by his clothing. He begins explaining, surprised that Estio didn't already know that a young lady from a certain family had recently contracted a severe illness. With the three of them indulging in some gossip about the latest news in town, the merchant mentions that he had heard it was a heart condition, causing the girl to freak out whenever she saw blood and suffer nightmares every night. Some time ago, the soldiers of that family had been massacred, leaving the girl terrified of the emptiness left behind in the mansion. Because of this, the Viscount was recruiting new soldiers to fill the place again, hoping to find a way to calm the young lady. Hearing this, Estio remains quiet until the merchant finishes, sharing what he knows, then asks if there's anything else they could help with. Mubian asks the man if he could at least sharpen his sword, while Estio recalls which girl the merchant was talking about as if he already knew her. But interrupting his thoughts, Mubian hands him one of his weapons, a small knife. Estio asks why he's doing that, and the Duke responds that although it isn't much, it's better to be as prepared as possible. He adds that Estio is too careless with his own safety and needs to take better care of himself. As they leave the shop, Estio thanks the man, and the two of them continue walking through the city streets together. Suki suddenly appears behind Estio, who notices his presence and asks the cat if he remembers a girl named Sarah. Suki responds that he doesn't recall all the humans he encounters along the way. Estio says that it might be better if the cat doesn't remember her. The cat then questions Estio about why those people had made his life difficult, and yet Estio was still upset. They talk a bit more about the matter until Suki asks what he plans to do about the whole situation. But with a melancholic look, Estio decides that he won't do anything. Returning to the guild branch, a commotion is brewing. A frantic blonde man appears at the counter, complaining that the guild had rejected his request. As he rants, Estio enters the place and recognizes the person as Viscount Fabien. Apparently, the man had been trying to speak with the guild leader for several days, but still hadn't had his request accepted. Using all the status of his position as a Viscount, he treats the receptionist terribly as she tries to explain the situation to him calmly. Nubian also realizes that this was the Viscount from the rumors they had uncovered earlier and comments that it seems the one truly going mad is the Viscount himself, not his daughter. As he observes the man's attire and demeanor, Nubian adds that this behavior was nothing like how a noble should conduct himself in such a situation. He suggests that it might be best to simply ignore the Viscount and walk past him without engaging. Estio agrees with Mubian's thoughts, but as they walk towards their destination, the Viscount notices the boy's presence in the room. He becomes pleased to see Estio and rushes towards him, adopting a friendlier tone and grabbing the boy by the arms. The Viscount asks if Estio will stay there from now on, but without answering any of his questions, Estio simply orders the man to release him. The Viscount, who seems to harbor a slight fear of Estio, formally reintroduces himself and explains his daughter's situation, asking if Estio would help with her problem. But Estio, uninterested in the man's issues, coldly asks why he should do so. The Viscount tries to explain that only Estio might be able to help, perhaps by erasing her memories or at least improving her sleep. Estio refuses, stating that he's already occupied with a task for someone else. Fabien, indifferent to whoever Estio might be helping, insists that it doesn't matter. Estio should just cancel his current mission and come to his aid immediately. Nubian, standing beside Estio, catches Fabien's attention, prompting the Viscount to ask who this man was. Nubian introduces himself as the client and mentions that he has no intention of canceling his request to cater to the Viscount's wishes. This causes Fabien to curse Estio silently in his thoughts, calling him a little brat without realizing that Estio could hear him. In response, Estio decides to reveal his name to Fabien, who's shocked to learn who he really is. Everyone in the room is stunned to see the dupe being served by the guild leader. Reflecting on what might have caused Estio to refuse his plea, Fabian remembers the last time they met. Desperate to win the boy's help, he brings up the incident. But Estio calmly replies that he no longer cares about what happened in the past. Focusing on the present is more important now. He recalls that Fabian was exactly the same back then, unchanged in his personality. He still couldn't recognize his own mistakes or apologize. One last time, the Viscount pleads with Estio of showing genuine desperation. But without being able to provide a plausible reason for Estio to help him, Fabian falls silent. With that, Estio turns away and leaves the area with Mubian by his side. With no other ideas, Fabian suddenly shouts out his daughter's name, Sarah, telling Estio that she wanted to see him. He then falls to his knees, begging Estio to save his daughter, shocking everyone present with his humble posture. Seeing this, Estio asks the man to listen carefully, telling him that he won't accept any reward from him. He then states that from this point on, all decisions will be made by him alone until the end. Even as the Viscount begs on his knees, his forehead pressed to the floor, Estio realizes that this man, despite everything, would never apologize to him, not even once. In a new scene, we see the mansion of the girl Sarah, who gazes melancholically out the window. Her dog tries to catch her attention by tugging on her clothes, but she seems uninterested in the animal. Suddenly, a black cat lands on her windowsill, surprising her. She looks closely into the cat's eyes and for some reason asks if he is Estio, because his gaze resembles Estio's so much. She then comments that at first she thought Estio was rather foolish for being so thin and quiet. With a sorrowful expression, she notes how his ability to read others' hearts gave him an emptiness that was difficult to ignore. She muses that if she had that power, she would love it, as she could talk to her dog Hiru all day without complaint. But despite all this, as she looked at Estio, the girl realized that his eyes were, in fact, very beautiful, capable of calming her heart. And as she starts to understand why the boy uses those blue eyes to kill, she admits that she couldn't think of anything else. Even witnessing such a scene before her, she feels a sense of relief. Even though all those people had died, Estio hadn't harmed her family. To Sarah's surprise, as she lamented, Estio suddenly appeared in her room, telling her not to blame herself for something that wasn't wrong. She was shocked, unable to believe he was really there, and Estio greeted her, saying, "Hello, Miss Saralyn." He extended his hand to her, and when Sarah realized it was real, she beamed with joy, reminding him that she had already told him to just call her Sarah. Sarah asked if he had come to see her at her father's request, but Estio replied that it had nothing to do with the Viscount. He explained that he came because of what she had said earlier about them being friends. She was delighted, saying they were secret friends, and she was thrilled that he had remembered. Estio told her that, as her friend, he had no reason to harm her or her family. He then mentioned that he would only erase her memories. Terrified, Sarah asked what her friend meant by that. Estio explained that she didn't need to worry because it was actually necessary. He placed his hand on her head, but she pushed it away, slapping his hand and demanding to know what he was talking about, still not understanding the situation. Estio then asked Sarah if she would prefer to simply die, to which she responded, frozen in shock, that she wouldn't. He explained that if she forgot everything related to him, she would be able to smile again when she saw her family. Sarah lowered her head, clenching her fists in frustration, unable to understand why all of this was necessary. She then asked Estio if ignorance was bliss, suggesting it was easier to just avoid everything one didn't like. Challenging everything he had said, she asked if adults dealt with situations like this by simply ignoring the things they experienced. Estio replied that it wasn't exactly like that, but Sarah cursed him, saying she was afraid of forgetting the emotions she felt at that moment. She was also scared of forgetting her mistakes and repeating them, just like her father. She clutched her dog, hugging the animal tightly, saying that if she forgot, she would also forget him, something she never wanted to happen. Hearing his friend's lament, Estio asked her what she wanted to do, and she responded by saying she only wanted to continue being his friend. He asked Sarah if that would be enough, and she agreed, saying it would be fine if that were the case. After all, she was Seraphine de Fabian, so he should never erase her memories. With an understanding reached between them, we see Estio leaving the place with Suki. Sarah hesitated, wondering if she could really do things right. As Estio leaned on the windowsill, he reassured her that she would definitely succeed, then jumped into the yard, leaving a few magical feathers floating in the air. The scene enchanted Sarah, who watched Estio's group, realizing that he had made many friends along the way. They walked together in silence for a while until Estio decided to break the ice, confronting his companions, who seemed to know his whereabouts. Parker explained that Mubian had dragged him there, saying he was looking for Estio. Mubian then appeared, asking what Estio meant by his question. He explained what had happened earlier at the guild branch. When they arrived at the dorms, Estio had asked the dupe to rest a bit while he quickly headed up the stairs. Realizing that Estio was heading to meet his old friend, Mubian understood what was happening and remarked that Estio still acted like a child. Deciding to follow him to the location, Mubian claimed he already knew everything. The only thing he hadn't known was that the young lady was love-struck over the boy, to which Estio responded that it wasn't like that at all. Seeing the situation, Mubian decided to stop talking before he complicated things further. Meiju then waved from the window, cheerful about his friend's return as dinner was just ready. Mubian commented that he was starting to feel hungry indeed, and Parker reminded them that they would be leaving the next day, so it was best to eat well now. As Estio entered the room, he reflected on the following day, which would finally bring him face to face with his hometown village. Meanwhile, Mubian and Parker began arguing over the pigeon's confusing menu, as Parker seemed unsure of his own ingredients. The next day, the group began their ascent up the mountain, with Ahuru making some comments about his experience with climbing. Neju, noticing that his friend wouldn't be able to walk much longer, picks up the small cactus in his hands, bringing joy to Ahuru. Parker, struggling with the heat, complains about the rough terrain, mentioning that even with a carriage, the ride would have been full of jolts. Mubian, also weary from the journey, remarks that they had been walking for a long time and asks if there was still much further to go. Estio reassures him that they just needed to walk a little more, and Mubian comments that, considering how deep they had to venture into the mountain, Estio's village must be quite isolated. For the first time, Estio pauses to think about this and even agrees with Mubian. Parker, walking a bit behind the two, comments on how the area is so secluded that there wouldn't even be any thieves, as there were no people to steal from. He then asks Estio how long it had been since he left his hometown, to which Estio replies that he left at the beginning of the year. The pigeon asks how his departure was, which prompts Estio to recall memories of people driving him away, calling him cursed. As Parker continues talking, he mentions that the boy's sense of responsibility must be enormous, seeing as he left to work at the first opportunity he got. Lost in his thoughts, Estio doesn't quite grasp what his friend means by responsibility. Parker clarifies that leaving one's hometown is something even adults find difficult, even if it's to pursue their dreams. Estio, who had a very unpleasant experience, explains that it wasn't for something virtuous like responsibility. Turning his back, he recalls that the real reason for his departure was simply the desire to survive. The group, sensing the shift in Estio's mood, exchange glances, trying to understand what had happened, while Parker continues to ask Estio questions. Discovering that Estio's family still lived in the same place, Mubian starts recalling the information he had gathered as a duke. He then asks if his family would be happy to see him return. Once again, Estio remains silent, not answering, and Parker starts to find it all rather strange since, despite all their progress, Estio still didn't seem happy. Remembering that Estio had never spoken about his family before, Parker notices the boy's darker expression and wonders why. It seemed impossible, for instance, that they could have mistreated someone as powerful as him. As Parker ponders, he spots something ahead that looks like smoke. Realizing there might be a fire nearby, he decides to fly ahead to check the situation. Mubian notices the smoke and asks if the mountain was actually on fire, but Estio calmly explains that the smoke was coming from where the village was located. Surprised that this was the location of Estio's village, Mubian asks if this meant that the village was on fire at that very moment. Estio, with a smile, replies, "Who knows?" showing a surprising amount of cheerfulness at the possibility. Mubian, confused by Estio's calm demeanor, asks why he seems so unbothered, while Neju expresses concern for the villagers and asks what they should do. Mubian, analyzing the situation, explains that when a fire reaches such proportions in a mountain village, it's not an easy task to deal with, especially without a water manipulator in their group. It would be practically helpless. Neju, intrigued, becomes fascinated by the existence of people who can manipulate water. Mubian adds that there are sorcerers who can use nearby water sources, and elementalists who can even create rain clouds. Parker returns to the group after investigating and reports that for the moment, the mountain wasn't on fire. Estio, disappointed, asks what he meant by "for the moment." Parker explains that the villagers had built an altar with a pillar and set it on fire. But as he struggles to describe what he saw, he starts thinking of a way to continue explaining. Ahuru, anxious to hear everything, complains about Parker's delay, while Parker, still unsure of what his eyes had seen, continues. Estio, now curious, presses him to explain. Parker then reveals that there was a person tied to the burning pillar. Estio, in disbelief, asks Parker to confirm what he just said. Parker affirms that he really did see exactly what he described, adding that the person tied to the pillar also seemed to still be alive. Hearing this, Estio runs ahead of everyone towards his village, knowing that what Parker saw couldn't be wrong. No matter how cruel the villagers of Selbia had been, Estio couldn't believe they were now spreading such evil. Estio recalls that if the villagers were truly cruel to that extent, he would have been the first person tied to the pillar. Arriving at the scene out of breath from running as fast as he could, he is met with the exact sight his friend had described. A girl was screaming for help tied to the pillar, and Estio recognized her. It was his friend Bella. She pleaded for help from what appeared to be her siblings and parents, but a woman harshly scolded her, cursing her. Desperate, Bella began to recall moments from her life, how her parents never played with her because they were too busy, telling her to go outside and not bother them while they worked. Due to the lack of attention from her parents, she became lonely until she found a group of friends while walking alone through the streets, which made her happy, thinking she had finally understood what it meant to be loved. As she grew older, Everyone in the town seemed to like her because of her beauty. But this desire for love, stemming from her parents' neglect, led to her developing a deep-seated need for the affection of those around her, which eventually brought her trouble with other women's husbands. All of this, driven by her obsession with being loved by others, led her to be labeled a witch by the townspeople. Crying out to those who had once said they loved her, Bella wept in despair as she was bombarded with insults. Out of options, she began begging for help from anyone, spotting a black cat perched atop of the pillar staring at her. The townspeople, noticing the black cat's appearance, declared it a sign of danger, affirming that Bella must truly be a witch. As Bella locked eyes with Suki, she suddenly remembered Estio, noting the similarity in their gazes, and started blaming him for her situation. But just as she was cursing Estio, the ropes binding her body were suddenly cut. The crowd stood in disbelief as Estio appeared seemingly out of nowhere, holding a small knife, having saved Bella. He caught her in his arms and she, confused, asked if it was really him, while an older villager also noticed the insignia of the Ignis Guild on Estio. Estio leaped from the pillar, calming the situation, and demanded to know what on earth they were doing there. The elder who had appeared earlier explained that the girl was a sinner who had angered the gods and was now paying for her sins. Estio asked what sin she had committed, and a woman responded by saying that the wretch had bewitched a man from another town and killed him. His older sister, Rosette, stepped forward, remarking that it seemed he had become someone of importance, but it didn't matter much. She asserted that the girl he had saved was a murderer. Bella tried to protest, but Rosette continued, explaining to her brother that Bella was a witch who had committed adultery with all the men in the town, killed them and eaten their livers, performing rituals with their bodies. The crowd, horrified by what they were hearing, listened as Rosette spoke. Estio challenged Rosette's accusations, asking if she had any proof of these claims. Rosette scoffed, saying they didn't need such things in their town. A man who also seemed to know Estio accused him of being a cursed child for protecting a sinner. This man was his older brother, Terriet. Terriet asked his brother why he had crawled back to their village like a rat. Estio responded calmly, stating that Bella had never killed anyone, as he had seen all her memories at that very moment. He informed them that there was no memory of her taking anyone's life. Bella, standing beside him, agreed with Estio's version of events, while the crowd began to debate whether to trust his ability or not. But before they could decide, someone threw a stone at Estio's face, injuring the old man who had spoken earlier. As the rain began to fall, blood splattered from Estio's face where the stone had hit him. Bella informed him of the injury on his face, to which Estio smiled, remarking that the place really hadn't changed at all. He then ordered everyone to stop. Immediately, the crowd kneeled before the boy. Without being able to move, the villagers began to murmur that Estio had cursed them. His brother, Terriet, appeared, also cursing Estio for doing this even to the people who had raised him. Just then, as magical feathers floated in the air, the rest of Estio's group finally caught up to him. Nubian stepped in, attempting to defuse the conflict by explaining that the villagers should show more respect to the leader of the Ignis Guild, questioning where their manners were. Rosette, his sister, asked if this was the famous guild she had heard about, while the elder helped to calm the situation, urging everyone to return to their homes. He invited the members of the Ignis Guild to follow him to his house to escape the rain that had started to fall. Bella, having nowhere else to go, tried to speak with Estio, tugging on his cloak to get his attention. She thanked him for saving her, but Estio bluntly explained that he hadn't really intended to save her. Hearing this, Bella insisted that despite his cold words, she knew he was a kind person. But Estio brushed off her words, aware that she still harbored hatred towards him, even at that moment. He reminded her that she had wished for him to be the one tied to the pillar and burned alive just moments earlier. Bella screamed in denial, but Estio pushed her hand away from his cloak, telling her that he wasn't kind enough to tolerate someone who thought of him as disgusting, as she did. He warned her that once he completed the request he had received at the guild, he never wanted to see her again because she and the town exhausted him. Bella continued to speak, trying to hold his attention, but Mubian, who had been listening, asked what Estio was doing, noting the nonsense Bella was spouting. Estio moved forward, leaving Bella behind, who then called him brother, reminding him of their childhood friendship. But Estio, uninterested, asked when they had become close enough to use such terms. As Estio walked away, Bella fell to her knees, the rain soaking her as it poured down. Unwilling to accept her new reality, she began to scream at the sky, asking why this was happening to her. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell and see you next time on Tob's channel.